White Salmon Bridge. Okay. Try it again. There you go. Round two. Like to welcome everybody to the March 10th Hood River White Salmon Bridge Authority Commission meeting. Taking roll, we've got from the Oregon side, Mike Fox, Arthur Babbitts is on online, Catherine Thomas here, Grant Polson is in attendance. Ben, okay, I see Ben. On the Washington side, we have Jake Anderson, Marla Kiesler, Eric Wilson. Ben Berger is online. Anybody else? Okay, well, we've got a quorum, so let's continue.
Can you just clarify who the voting members are for today?
It will be from the Oregon side, myself, Arthur Babbitts, Grant Polson. On the Washington side, it will be Jake Anderson, Marla Kiesler, and since Eric Wilson is alternate too, I guess it's going to be Eric.
Thanks.
Unless Doug signs on here. Okay, with that in mind, call to order. We've got a quorum.
Arthur has his hand.
Yeah, I just want to note I have another board meeting, actually two other board meetings that are overlapping with this. So I will be leaving at 3. I'll be able to pop in occasionally, but I will have to bounce back and forth.
Okay, so if you're not available, Catherine is here to take your vote.
Yeah, if there's something critical that you guys need me for, text me. I know Grant has my phone, so if someone would just text me, I'll try to pop back in.
Okay. Any modifications, additions?
Just to confirm, I thought on the Oregon side, the alternates were assigned to a specific commissioner seat. Is that not the case?
We changed that.
Okay.
Anything else? Okay, any modifications, additions to the agenda? If no, can I get a motion?
I would move that we approve the agenda as presented.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, it passes. Approval and correction of the minutes from the last board meeting. Any comments on those meeting minutes?
I just had a question. I thought we had talked a while back about going to action only minutes would be much more efficient. I'm just curious why, if staff had a reason why we're continuing to do traditional minutes.
We have not changed. I didn't remember us being told to change.
I'd like to ask that we consider it. It's much more efficient since we record via Zoom. Then all that's required is time code of each discussion topic or action, but it would take away the staff time that might be included on the version of minutes we currently maintain.
Any discussion on that?
How does that work when people aren't able to attend to kind of catch up? Because we've got people that come in and out.
Yeah, so how we do it for the city of White Salmon, I don't know if Grant could speak for Hood River if they've gone to this, but especially during COVID when so many meetings did go to Zoom. So you always have a recorded archive if you're maintaining Zoom. What the meeting minutes do now is provide you the direct time code callouts so that you can go to that time code. They call out the time code for when an action is moved. And then secondly, if there was a desire, which I think we would want to do for our authority, we have a lot of discussion, you would time code when each different discussion topic starts.
Any strong, it looks like, do you have something to say?
I do know that some folks do rely on like the longer minutes to kind of gather the data. So that would be my only concern is that some folks do actually they don't have the time to watch the Zoom per se. That's the only point I would make. Yeah, go back and watch.
You've got Arthur.
Yeah, Arthur. Thanks. So in Oregon, the state requirement is that you note any action that's taken, any motions that are made, who made the motions and what the vote was, and that you note what subjects were discussed. So what Marla is suggesting, as I understand it, would be fully in compliance with Oregon law. I actually find it easier to catch up on a meeting when I can identify just the subjects that were looked at and then choose which subjects I want to look at Zoom. So I agree with Marla that this is probably a more modern and more efficient way to do it. The idea that you need the text in order to know what happened at the meeting, I think, is a little antiquated now. Knowing that a subject, there's only a handful of subjects that most people are interested in. If someone's going to look at our minutes, they'll be interested in one subject or two, or they're just looking for key things to trigger their interest, and this lets them focus very quickly on that.
Other comments?
We moved to action minutes at the county 3 years ago, and it took away a lot of issues that we were having with people arguing over what was and how things were said. So I think it's a good move.
Can we just do it, or do we need a motion to give
If
direction?
there's unanimous consent, it can move in that order. If there's not, then we can bring a motion to the floor.
I like the idea of us actually moving it by motion, since it does relate to a statutory requirement in Oregon. So I'd be happy to make the motion that we move to action only minutes.
Second, anyone?
I'll second.
All in favor?
All right.
All right,
Aye.
opposed? Okay. Very good.
Mike, I did have one other item. I think Jacob shows up as present and absent on the meeting notes.
Yeah.
He was,
Yeah, I was going to bring it up.
That's the wrong, Jacob.
No, it shows that I was present. It also says I was absent. So it needs to be I was absent. And then Nathan DeVol shows up as absent as a commissioner. He needs to move to the alternate.
So with those corrections, any other comments or changes?
You need that for
Okay, so with those changes. Yeah, with those,
Yeah, and it rained enough overnight that it totally could have gotten that wet.
I'm like,
Jeremiah, you need to go on mute.
Did you?
Okay, so can I get a motion that we approve the meetings with the corrections, meeting notes with the
So moved.
corrections?
second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, passed with changes. Public comment, 3 minutes per person, 30 minutes total. Is there any members of the public that wish to address the board? Please raise your hand if you're online. Seeing none in the meeting room here, we'll go ahead and move into executive reports. Co-chairs report, anything?
Most things that I would talk about are going to be talked about later. I would just mention one thing that's not included. I had a meeting with the Board of Commissioners for Klickitat County to give them an update of the bridge project. And then also talk a little bit and make sure that they were in favor of potentially an application for $0.09, which are grant dollars through the sales and use tax. For up to $300,000 if we were interested in doing that, so that we could show local community support. And the commissioner said they would be in favor of that. I've got a few things they would like to see a schedule, our most recent schedule of what our plan for construction looks like, and everything else I've got worked out with them.
Any comments on that? I personally thank the county for doing so. I think it really helps and shows the strength of the community in support of the bridge. And I would say thank you. Others though?
I guess I would just have one question, and this relates not just to Klickitat, but I think Hood River, this narrative that we need to show local commitment. I think there's a counter to that the local residents pay through the toll towards this bridge, and they pay their tax dollars into the county to provide the other services. So I'm just curious, I guess, the commission's position as an authority on how we feel about owning such a statement that seems to indicate that we agree that there's not enough local buy-in already on a project that many residents think they've paid into for their entire time living in the gorge.
I guess what I'd say is, so in our conversations with the port, some of the port commissioners were asking, what are the counties doing to step up to the plate, and what are the other potential taxing districts doing, the cities, the counties. And I clearly point out, we've worked with Hood River County to come up with that loan package, put a lot of time and effort into it. Klickitat County's stated that they're in favor of donating the land, either the whole parcel or a portion of the parcel as local match. And so we're continuing to ask the other entities for anything that they can give as well. And this is just another example of that, where this is something that we can market to our federal and state partners, that the counties, cities, and everyone is stepping up to the plate. It's not, we're just expecting the federal government or the state government to pitch in and pay for everything. Everybody is coming to the table.
And so the 300,000 is envisioned to do what currently?
$0.09 can be used for construction. And it can be used for working on coming up to construction. There's a few things that it can't, same thing, like most state and federal grants can't be used for.
So there was some deliberation on this 300,000 is either to make a case about potentially covering a cash shortfall, or it's intended to go against future construction and draw down another federal or state ask by 300,000. Like, what was that formula? Maybe that's through the funding committee, but I'm just curious.
And that was just what I put forward as a possibility, looking at it. I was looking for is kind of like the same thing we have with the tribes. Is it a yes or no, or is it something you want to bring forward? And if the Klickitat County Public Economic Development Authority was good with it, as well as the county commissioners were good with it, then it's something that we as a board can have a conversation about is, number one, do we want to spend the time, effort, and money to put in an application? Is it worth our time to do that? And if so, what's the right amount?
Great. So a future 0.9 application, just to confirm, will come to the full board for approval and sign off before we would ask for funding.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, Arthur. You're on mute. You're on mute.
Yeah, I'm trying to fix it. Sorry. I'm hoping that Commissioner Kiefler can explain to us. I don't see how this could be viewed as a negative. I think there are multiple audiences, but it seems to me that the legislatures of Oregon and Washington, seeing local county throwing in cash when it can, or throwing in kind when it can, or the ports doing that, it seems like all of that would be positives. Where is the negative on that?
Well, if it came across as if I was implying a negative, that wasn't the intent. I just want to be clear and make sure we're having conversation and vetting and are deliberate in why we're asking for money from certain entities. And Klickitat County has continued to go through an increasing budget shortfall, which is still the case. They're looking to other agencies to cover some of those gaps. And so for this to go parallel with an ask from a funding route, the $0.09 in Washington State are only allocated to certain counties. An acknowledgement of some of the struggles that the rural parts of the state continue to go through. And those are identified and set aside as infrastructure funds that can also now be used for housing and are available to those local agencies within that county. So this would be, a bi-state entity coming forward with an ask for funds that otherwise would be going to infrastructure or housing improvements for the residents of Klickitat. So I just raise it so that we are aware and intentional as we move forward in considering it, to consider the optics, but also how necessary that commitment may be. And if we would potentially want to engage the county and look for funding from a different source, or just at large, what our position is on the amount that we expect would signal the significant local contribution that seems to have been raised in recent meetings.
Okay, so you're identifying a potential opportunity cost to your county of this funding, and that's your concern.
Yeah, I think it's just something, especially for a bi-state board, we should all just be aware as it moves forward, the context of what 0.09 funding is in the county that we're asking for it from. And potentially, as we continue to work through that, we're considering other ways that we may engage Klickitat to ask for funds that might not be as dedicated. But there's where I would raise concern. I think that we would see pushback in theory, because I know they're going through some budget shortfalls in general.
And this is not a given at all, is it, Commissioner Anderson?
Given that we would receive the dollars?
Yes.
Or We would apply for it, but that's why when I gave the presentation to the Quesapita board, I wanted to make sure that they'd be open to the application. And both the Quesapita board and the county board themselves, who are the final sign off on it, both said they would be willing and interested. Because this project is the number one project that we have in Clickitat County, and they want to be seen as supporting it.
Thank you.
So can I try to pare back what you said to make sure I got it right in my head? But I think what you're saying is those funds have other allocations. And before we start taking them, we ought to know what we're taking them away from.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
I got it.
But maybe I'm wrong, but isn't that the job of Clickitat County to make those decisions? They've got to prioritize where they're going to put their money.
Sure, I think I just mean more, if we were to submit that application, any of us, if asked the question in the street, should be able to give that succinct answer and justification and confirm that we did deliberate and why we stand firm that that is a worthy ask.
It's a continuity of that resource all the way down. Did we make that decision consciously? Does the county make it consciously?
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on. Project director report. Go ahead.
I just want to make, there's no action from that, right? I
No.
didn't get any action out of that discussion. That was just,
It was just fun.
okay. So I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss an action there.
We do need an action at some point, and that is whether or not we want to put together an application or, and so what I would say is the right thing to do would be is if we think that there's value in it, we should send it to the finance committee for their review and recommendation.
Yeah, I would think we would want to do that.
Sure.
Anybody object to signing that to the funding committee? So you go study it, make a recommendation back to us to either submit an application or not, reasoning.
When do you want it back by?
What time is it today?
Tomorrow, thanks.
Next meeting?
You want back by 5 o'clock? 24th is the next meeting. I think we have one on the 19th before then, so the next 2 weeks, or we can wait till the following meeting. You don't twice a month.
Whichever one you want. What I'll do is I'll get Grant in contact with our economic development director so he can get a copy of the application to see how much work it is to put forward an application.
Okay. Project director's report.
All right, we continue to work with the PDB on a few different items. I'm just going to quickly bring them up in here. Is inconsistencies in the biological opinion, the biological assessment, working through the negotiations with Kiewit for their next phase, which is to move design from 15% to final design or release for construction plans. And continue to work on FHWA on what they now call build grant, which used to be raise grants, and I'm sorry, infra grants and BIP grants, sorry, and working with them on that. We do have a slowdown on the project. We have slowed down our regulatory environmental right-of-way design. Also, we're looking at slowing down the traffic and revenue, all due to potential funding shortfalls of not getting the infra grant, as well as not getting not knowing what the status of the state funding will be.
Let's
So we
stop,
are,
if we could stop right there for a minute. Brad Boswell is on.
oh, that's,
He's got to leave early, so hold that thought there. We want to talk a little bit about that. So Brad, you're on.
Sure. Thanks, guys. Great to be with you again today. First, I want to thank Jake, Mike, Carrie for being here a couple weeks ago on the ground in Olympia. We had a whole bunch of meetings. I think generally they were good meetings. I think one of the things that really did come through, and we're going to have to navigate, and that is the situation with the overall transportation budget and the growing concerns around the funding shortfalls that are occurring up here in Washington State. It was pretty clear that at least the chairs and rankings that in the absence of new revenue, there are going to be at least changes in projects and probably push out as far as, when funding can be available. We don't know any of those things yet. At least a good news front, they are beginning the process of talking about some sort of, whether it's a major package or a stopgap package, some sort of new transportation revenue to help fund those gaps. In our conversations with even the Republicans, there was an acknowledgement of the challenge and I think a willingness to be part of the solution in the course of this. We will have the state revenue forecast is due on March 18th, so next week. That is usually the kind of the kickoff of the budget season here in session, and that's both for the general fund and the transportation budget. I expect sort of a scramble sometime, usually within 5 to 7 days of when that revenue forecast, the budgets come out. And that's both general fund and transportation. So that'll be our first look at what we may be looking at. One of the things I want to really, put forward with this group, and that is the initial transportation budget proposal that's going to probably come from the House or Senate or both is probably not going to have any new tax revenue proposals and will undoubtedly represent what's sort of called to or referred to as an all cuts budget. I expect that we will, in some way, shape, or form, just like most of the other projects in this state, either looking at some sort of impact to this project. What I really want to caution everyone on is do not panic based on that initial budget, whatever comes out. Part of what happens around here, for good or ill, is that they will put budgets out under assumed current revenue structures. Those usually have significant impacts to projects, and then people get exercised and energy starts getting generated around a revenue package to prevent those cuts and those things. Right, wrong, or indifferent, it's just sort of how things usually progress. And my cautionary note here to everyone is do not panic on that first initial budget. It does not mean that we're necessarily going to get cut. It does mean that we will at least know where their heads are at if they don't get new tax revenue or new revenue options. We will be engaging with that. We'll be doing everything we can to certainly prevent that. But I also don't want folks to either be caught by surprise or panic if or when there are some impacts to this project in this initial phase. It doesn't mean session's over. It doesn't mean that that's the final budget. That's just an initial starting point for both discussions and negotiations. So we will be navigating that process to the best of our ability. But that's one of the things that I just want to make sure that people understand as we move forward through this next phase of session, is that there's going to be a lot of unknowns. There is going to be probably visible impacts on the initial proposals that come out, and we will, do everything we can to navigate those and, not just prevent them, but hopefully continue to work to maybe, if there is some sort of transportation package, get to that 125 that we've been seeking. Again, there's a lot of variables, and we are one small part of a much bigger puzzle that legislators are going to be working on. I'm going to stop there. I know I threw out a bunch of stuff for folks, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Brad, that's pretty consistent with when we were up there a couple of weeks ago. That was the clear message that the three of us got. We shared here. So appreciate it.
Yep.
I'm
I
gonna
think
go.
one of the things that I'll just put out for this group too is where there will be a desire or a need to really kind of sharpen our pencil at some point and really get clear as far as phasing and what the art of the possible may be. I don't know exactly what that's going to look like. I just want the Carries and the Mike Shannons and everyone else in the room to understand that, we will probably need to bring some of that kind of information directly to the legislature at some point.
Yeah, as I remember when we were up there, it was really a positive note that we said, we don't need the money tomorrow. It could be in 28 and 29, and there was kind of a sigh of relief that we got from everybody that we talked to. So yeah, at some point in time, we've got to fine tune that cash flow. And we'll rely on you, Brad, to let us know when that time is.
But
Yep.
to be clear, that's the other portion to get us to the 125.
125.
We
yeah.
still need the 30 that was already planned for this next upcoming session. We still need that. It's just, we don't
And-
need the next 50.
Right. And we're going to be working on those details as we go forward. So I'll be working with folks offline to sort of get prepared for what or how those conversations may occur. I just want people to understand that I expect some of those kinds of things to occur.
And I guess the other way to put it, I see it is this is a great opportunity. That last 50 was going to be pretty difficult if there was no revenue package to come with it. The fact that they're in the hole and there will be a revenue package pushes that conversation to the forefront earlier than it otherwise usually would have had. And so we're kind of throwing all the chips on the table at the same time, hoping to keep what we have for the 30 coming, but also get that other 50 planned out there. And so there is a good opportunity here, and the timing might just be right for us.
Yeah, just a reminder why this is so important to get some kind of a commitment on the full amount. We can't go into construction until we have full funding. Even though we don't have to have it in the bank, we have to have a way forward on all the money, or the feds won't let us go. What I'd like to do is jump to Oregon right now. With Maddie and Mike's trip of last week. Maddie, could you give us a brief on it?
Hi, Commissioners. Maddie Doe from Thorn Run here. Happy Monday. Happy to give an update about Mike's visit down in Salem last week. We're in week 8 of the Oregon legislative session. Things are underway, and I think everyone's running around with a little bit of extra pep and worry in their steps for all the reasons of session. We had a really great series of meetings last week. There are 3 or 4 new members onto the Joint Transportation Committee this session. So we had Mike introduce himself, the project, and our ask this session. And for all of the meetings, the members actually already knew the bridge, knew the need, knew the problem statement, and were really eager to be supportive. So that was really positive to see. Additionally, we also checked in with the bridge's Oregon delegation, provided some updates to them, and then also checked in with the co-chairs of the JCT. I think similar to the conversation you all were just having with Brad right now, I think feedback and questions were similar from the Washington legislators. I think trying to get a grasp of where things are given just some of the uncertainty. And so I think at some point, similar to kind of just what just and so one other thing to flag just for you all, separate from the series of meetings, we do have a bill that outlines our funding commitment and the ask for next session from Oregon. It's House Bill 2184. We are tentatively penciled in, a lot of pencil bits from me today, but we're tentatively penciled in for a public hearing on April 1st in the evening from 5 to 6:30. So Thorn Run is working to confirm that meeting with the committee, and then we'll begin working with you all to prepare for the hearing. So happy to pause if there are any questions, or Mike, if there are any other things from last week that I might have missed.
So Maddie, will your team be leading on organizing for that public hearing a variety of voices speaking to the importance of this project from the region? Who are we looking to that will be coordinating that?
My understanding is Thorn Run will be coordinating with Dan Marr on it. Mike, does that sound right?
We'll work through the council committee to figure out who needs to go and contact local. That was But we talked about with Lauren Run, or I talked about when I was down there was, we need a very broad, large support. And they're gonna confirm that we need a very large, broad support. And if we do, then we should try to get as many and as much support as we can down there. It was scheduled for the 18th. That got canceled, I think, Friday of last week. They just tentatively rescheduled for April 1st. So once we lock that down and know for sure that April 1st, then we'll start putting it on people's calendars and getting it out.
So when you're talking broad support, you're talking outside of the.
People other than the commissioners.
Yeah.
I mean, it should be ideally all 12 commissioners plus whatever county folks that we can get.
I mean, I think we should talk about this. This is the first time I'm hearing of it, so it's a good thing it's not the 18th, but I would ask that once that's finalized, if this is going through the comms committee, that staff, which means Danmar as well, please make those commissioners aware, because I think we've done work in the past. We have a pretty extensive list of different voices, and we should be deliberate in identifying, and we'll need lead time to assure ability to attend.
So this just, like you said, this just came up and.
So let's, thank you, Maddie. Let's move to the federal side of the house. Jim, can you give an update?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Fox. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. Just, we are still here, a lot of uncertainty at the federal level. It's not clear, when we're going to start to get a little bit of clarity in terms of when they're going to lift the funding freeze on discretionary funding, and when we can start to see the agency folks, starting to, execute project agreements and sign off on permits. So we're still kind of in this, waiting period here while, DOT is reviewing their discretionary programs, their guidance, their policies to make sure they comply with the president's executive orders. So we kind of are stuck in a little bit of limbo here, waiting for that to shake free. Hopefully, as DOT starts to staff up, which is ongoing, we'll start to get some of that clarity. But as of right now, we're just kind of waiting to see what happens there. And obviously, as everyone probably sees the news, I mean, we're seeing these reductions in force. I know there's been impacts at the division office levels. I know Oregon's been impacted. There's also been a lot of chatter around canceling leases and consolidating offices. So all of that's, led to a little more of that uncertainty. Obviously, it's led to an environment where a lot of the, FHWA folks may be just a little bit, more cautious in terms of how they proceed until they have clear direction from headquarters. So we're just kind of stuck in this limbo period. Obviously, that means, we're waiting on the infra project grant agreement. So we're kind of, stuck there. I will also say, not clear at this point what's going to happen with the BIP program, where we have that application in. I will say that there were some other outstanding notices of funding opportunity. One was the what is now known as the Build Grant, was we used to be Tiger, and then it became Build, and then Raise Grants, and now it's back to Build. The administration or DOT reissued that, renaming it Build, but then also striking all the references to diversity, equity, climate change, changing how they did the scoring as it relates to the inclusion of non-motorized elements. So, trying to reflect some of the administration's priorities. I will also say that they have pulled back the Protect NOFO, that was on the street, and they have not reissued it. So the fact that it's been quiet on BIP, hopefully maybe that's a good sign. We'll have to see. But at this point, it's just kind of all stuck in this limbo of waiting for clearer direction from the secretary and from headquarters. So we'll have to see. I think, you're also seeing a lot of jockeying right now, which is leading to even more uncertainty around whether or not we're going to have a government shutdown. The House issued a bill over the weekend that would basically get us through the end of the year. And then it's unclear if they have the votes for it. It's unclear if the Senate has the votes for it. So kind of in this what's become an all too frequent game of chicken over threatening a government shutdown. So that's kind of the backdrop of what has already been an uncertain environment here in DC. And then into that, we are looking forward to having a delegation come out later this month, March 24th through the 27th, to come in and provide an update to the delegation and some of our champions on the Hill, as to what's happening, and letting them know, the need to move forward on the infra grant, and just give them a project update on what's happening with the various permitting and environmental activities that are going on. We're also trying to schedule meetings with USDOT. That is a work in progress, trying to identify folks who are down there, the right point of contacts there. So, we're hopeful we'll have that set up, but looking forward to having, folks in town. I think it's a good opportunity to make sure the delegation is aware of some of the concerns we have over the potential delays, or well, not potential, the delays we're seeing, and the slowdown we're seeing with approving some of our documentation, as well as obviously executing the project agreement. So, I know, some of us were on a call with Senator Cantwell's staff. I mean, they're looking for examples and want to hear about examples, and they are having dialogue with politicals at DOT about the need to try to move some of these things forward. So it'll be a good opportunity to provide them an update on the project and what we need going forward. So questions, complaints?
Well, really positive news there, Jim. Appreciate it.
You're the fourth one of these I've done today.
Arthur.
Yeah, so Jim, I'm not going to ask you to give me information that you don't have, but let me ask the question a different way. When will you, or when should we start to get worried and start to think about, plan B, C, D, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the answer to that, unfortunately. I would say I think we're still at a point where, they're in their review process, under the secretary's directive that he put out to the modal agencies. So I would like to think, you'd start to get some clarity moving forward once some of the more political, especially at federal highways, they start to staff up on the political level. But I don't know when I would say pull the ripcord, but I think it's just maybe another month we'll start to get a little more clarity in terms of what they're going to start giving directives to division offices and others to start working on finalizing project agreements for existing grants. That assumes their grant programs that they don't find any issues with, which I think is something else. In the spirit of continuing to pass along good news, I think one thing we could potentially see is some kind of a package that comes from the administration to the Hill, suggesting areas where they could rescind funding. I don't think infra is one of those areas that we should be worried about, but I think things like the EV charging program could be, and things like that. So, I think that's the kind of process we're going through now, is looking at all these programs and the NOPOs that are associated with them, and where are they and how are they consistent with the administration's priorities, and removing references to DEI and climate change. So it's tricky because the last administration was the complete opposite, where if you didn't have those things in your applications, and the NOPOs all had that, you were likely not to be competitive, and now we're going the other way. So I wish I had a better answer. It's just unclear at this point, and where they are with their internal review. I will say, they are hearing from the Hill. People are starting to get, and that's why I think this trip coming up will be a positive step in us being able to talk to some of our champions. They are also hearing now from AASHTO, the Association for the State DOTs, basically saying, we understand, you're doing your review, but the slowdown on, planning and permitting, and then, the delays in the funding, they were starting to have a real impact, and we're really starting to get concerned that you could potentially lose a construction season in some of the northern states. So hopefully things like that. I mean, and that's not something that AASHTO normally does publicly. And I know that for a fact they've been having those conversations privately with Federal Highways and with DOT. So I think, that's the kind of thing that may start to ramp up, a little bit of urgency on them trying to provide clearer guidance and start to move forward, certainly on the programs where they're not going to find issues. And I'd like to think infra is one of those ones that would fall into that category versus, some of the other ones that have a very clear, nexus to climate and some of the other issues.
So you just mentioned infra. Could you just clarify what exactly is the status of the infra plan agreement? Have we heard anything?
Mike could probably give a better answer on that one than me.
Yeah, we submitted our documentation and final response comments in December of last year, which went to headquarters with FHWA, and we were expecting to get back signatures. That's where it's at.
But everything just went.
Don't forget, the reason they couldn't act on it was because we didn't have the step done until late February.
We had actually cleared that conversation up before we had sent it back to them in December, we had a financial plan that was approved because we separated the construction out, and they had verbally gotten discussions with ODOT and we're okay moving that forward. So that actually had been, although we weren't on the step, the resolution had been noticed and they could have moved forward with the signatures. So since then, we have now actually, the step has been updated and it actually shows it. But yeah, there was not, well, our opinion, there was nothing stopping them from signing it in.
Marla, you had a question?
Yeah, thanks, Jim, for the update. I had a couple of questions regarding the active BIP application that we have in. Is there any precedent in the past of a scoring matrix or the formula for judging applications changing during a window that was already announced and closed? Like, how confident should we be that the application we submitted will be scored the way that we wrote it for, based on the matrix?
Well, and this is a unique one, and I don't know of necessarily specific precedent. I mean, I'm sure it has occurred. I would say this one's kind of unique in the sense that for the first time they did this rolling application process. So we're still operating basically under the NOFA was issued like 2.5 years ago, I think, or Mike may remember, and then they've done changes to their cost benefit analysis. I will say under the secretary's memo to the agencies, it was pretty clear everything must have a positive cost benefit ratio, but they were going to take out the cost of carbon from that, which I know was one of the things that was beneficial in our analysis. Although I think, Mike, we did have a conversation.
Carrie, Carrie, do you recall? I think we did pull that out and we're still positive on our numbers. So.
Unfortunately, I mean, first of all, to your first question, in my experience, and obviously we're in a realm right now where anything can happen, and I wouldn't even want to pretend to have a crystal ball. But in my experience, in order to change the scoring rubric and the selection criteria for these grants, they would typically just not award any or cancel the program and issue another NOFO with all of the new requirements in the new NOFO. And the current administration has already done that, I think, with a grant program or two, where they've just canceled the program, issued I think the build grant, Jim, that you were talking about.
Yeah.
And they've issued new scoring criteria. But if you look at least the very initial guidance that the new administration has put out, de-emphasizing, actually eliminating things around climate change and carbon, DEI, those kinds of things. Our application and our benefit cost analysis did not rely heavily on those. And we think that even without any of the carbon offsets or anything like that, we still are going to be well above the required threshold to stay competitive. And the cutoff point is really a benefit cost ratio of 1.5 or better to keep us in the highly recommended category. And even without the carbon elements, we still achieve that. So, I'm hopeful. But again, I would just caution that we're at a time now where anything can happen. And I think the biggest concern at this point is just, is the program itself going to survive?
And then another question, just in looking at the scheduling, especially for meetings within the agency, how much turnover has existed downstream? Obviously, we know there's the political appointments, but is there at this point some consistency of people who we have met with previously, either within Build America or the other subsets under DOT? Or is this trip needing to also prioritize a lot of project education from a more general standpoint?
Yeah, well, I mean, from an agency standpoint, there has been a fair amount of churn. I think there are people there still who we've met with previously, not at the political level. I don't know, to be honest, if career staff are taking meetings with outside groups. So we're really looking to try to get with some of the politicals that are down there. I think
Which would likely be all new.
they will all be new. They will all be new. So we're working on that. I mean, that's a tougher nut to crack right now, but I think a lot of the career staff are very hesitant to do meetings unless they have clear guidance from political leadership, and that's not really existent, at the level of folks we've been talking to. But there has been a lot of churn at the career level too. I mean, a number of people have been let go from the division office. And some people have taken the fork, as it's been known, and some people are now saying they're willing to take another fork if it's offered. So it's kind of interesting times, to put it mildly, and just adds to the uncertainty.
Just by way of anecdote, I will say that it has been very difficult to even determine who is still there and who isn't. And no one would tell you they've taken the fork, even if they have. But I will say that the very few people we've gotten that will even answer phone calls have actually shared with me that they have been instructed not to talk to us. So it's not that it's not their choice not to talk to us. They've been instructed by their leadership not to have conversations with grant applicants and with clients, so to speak.
And that's why we're targeting, trying to get to, trying to identify somewhere in the political leadership that we can talk to. We'll see.
In the past, in my opinion, those trips are really, really important for the DOT and the federal highways. That's where I think we got the biggest bang for our buck. The politicians are fine, but we've gotten a lot of good G2 and feedback from the more technical side. So hopefully I guess it's about a month now, some of that will be broken loose and we can talk to some of the old folks as well, the old staffers. We're seeing it the same thing at the local level. Federal highways have lost a couple of people and we're playing catch up again now. So, okay, let's move on if we could. I want to go back to Mike and the director's report. He was talking about funding. I think now we've got a little better picture of what's going on funding that makes more sense.
Yep, what's given that, given kind of where we are on funding and what we just talked about, we are, as I said, slowing down some different activities. So there's a lot of things that we've moved out. We were anticipating giving a notice to proceed to Kiewit to start the next design in April 1st. We're moving that out to September 1st, giving ourselves time to get infra and or get the second path, which is state funding, and seeing what comes out of that state funding before we move forward with that second part of their contract, to advance design.
Can you just, for a point of clarification, so what was moved to September 1st is,
Starting the design and moving it from 15% to.
so are we considering, do we term that as phase 1B?
Phase 1B.
So phase 1B for Kiewit is now a September 1st start date.
That's the
correct.
forecast.
Yep.
Okay. And does that shift, is there a new milestone moment this spring where that might need to shift again? I saw in your director's report about the hope of moving some of the infra funding now. I imagine this is all
Yeah,
triggering.
we moved it out to September because we wanted to get through legislative session and we have no idea on infra. If we get infra sooner than that, then there is an opportunity to maybe advance that up a month or two, depending on when that comes. But we moved it out to allow time for getting through legislative session so that we have our backup plan to the infra and we understand where that is. If neither of those come together and we don't have resolution to either one of them, then the project's going to have to look at even bigger delays and bigger stoppages until we find funding for, I'll call it 1B. Because that can cause confusion. Last meeting, I was trying to avoid using the 1B term.
Yes.
So a September 1 start on design 1B.
September 1.
What does that mean for construction start?
So that will push out construction. Right now, the way design is tentatively scheduled is we think it's about 9 months. And James, tell me if Sarah's got a different opinion or if she's on this. Last we talked, it's about 9 months to get to 60%, which would make that about March. And then about another, I'll say 9 months to get to what I'd say 100% plans, and then which get us to the end of the year, and then about 3 months to do final comments, getting signed and sealed plans through the process. So about 20 months total, 21 months total. With that, we do not think that a construction schedule of 2026 is doable, and that the construction start would now be the next work window, which would be October 1st of 2027. What that does mean, though, is that is actually physically starting the work, which means 6 months prior to that, we would need to start making pre-orders, pre-buys, mobilization, all of those activities would start going on. So just as we're finishing design, they would start into the construction. All of that pending, of course, getting funding for construction. Right now, we're only approved, as I said earlier, in the STIP to go through the design phase. We cannot add the next phase into the STIP until we have all of our funding for construction secured. So there's still opportunities, and that's part of what we identified on the risk. Is that's probably our biggest risk for our schedule is the timing of the funding and allowing us to be able to go do the things we need to be able to hit those work windows to get on schedule with construction. Construction is, I'm going to say 4 to 5 years. There's things that could impact which side of that it goes on, depending on some work that we need to do here in phase 1A that could make it shorter or longer. So I would say 4 to 5 years from the start of construction to get the bridge open. And then demo is 2 to 3 years, again, kind of dependent on the flexibilities that we have or what we can work out on the approach to demo. So that's, or I'd say where we are currently on the project is those dates.
So we're going to talk about risk here in a little while, but we've also got some option engineering or economic engineering studies that we can start now before we get into 1B, assuming we can find the money for it, that hopefully will help reduce some of these costs. As you know, every year that we have to extend is a little over $40 million only in escalation. We just extended it a couple of years, guys. So it's a vicious cycle. You slip it out, you need more funding. You need more funding, you slip it out.
I think that's clear. And in the interest of time, because I think this all makes at least me very much wanting to get through the risk discussion and have the opportunity to discuss. So just to try to keep us focused on track, knowing we're already going long.
So a couple more things I want to make sure everybody's aware of is more in the weeds on the funding. right now you are working against the 5187 Washington
Yeah.
grant, which has about 5 million left. You are also working against the ARPA funding, which has just under 5 million. So you've got, I'll say, just about 10 million of actual funding to be able to work against. Cash in hand on that is your ARPA funds. When those ARPA funds are gone, then you will have no cash in hand to be able to make your invoice payments timely. So there is a concern that needs to be discussed about identifying cash in hand opportunities for the authority in order to be able to make their funding payments. And we have the lottery bond sale that is coming up in April for the 20 million from Oregon. That 20 million, we are anticipating to be available on June 1st, maybe slightly more than that, but or earlier than that, but that was through discussions with the Oregon group. So that 20 million would be available. That is not enough money to fund 1B. And we would not recommend that you move forward with 1B until it is fully funded. So you would want to hold on to as much of that as we can, or use it to advance work that would help in the streamlining of 1B. So we're working with Kiewit right now on what we're calling the extension of phase 1A to identify critical work between now and September 1st, which means we will have to do another extension of Kiewit's contract from June 30th to September to advance, or not advance, to work on informational type items like the resolution of inconsistencies between the BA and the BO, as well as some geotechnical work that would provide them information, are just a couple of the things that we're looking at having them work on between now and September. All things that we need to do in order to streamline or get decisions that we would want to take into 1B, as well as some design. There's some design parameters around vessel collision and approach to some of the other design that we want to talk through before we get into 1B, if we have the funding and it makes sense. So we are actively monitoring the cash flow on a month-by-month basis, as we have been. And we've allocated Kiewit's contract and our contract to stay under the funding that we have available on the project in order to not go cash negative and to avoid having to take out a loan. As long as we can, we have enough funding, I think, with the $10 million to get us through the state legislative processes so that we know whether or not we get the 60 million. So hopefully the 30 million from Washington, and our conversations with Oregon was to get a matching 30 million with that 60 million, with 20 million from Oregon lottery bonds would give you the 80 million that would allow you to start 1B and fully execute all of what would be in 1B. That would get the project to a signed and sealed set of plans, permits as far as we can take them right away, and you would pretty much have everything done, really would have everything done and put on the shelf, and you would be waiting for funding for construction. So that's how we're trying to set up the project right now. So,
Any other real high points that you need to make, Mike?
we covered everything else.
Okay,
Just want to make
appreciate it.
sure everybody knew where we were.
So if we remember 3 or 4 months ago, we said this is the time right now that we really needed the 75 million from the feds. It's not here. So we're in a cash flow crunch. It's going to get a little worse before it gets better. So we got to be very careful how we spend money for the next month or 2 months.
I just had a point of clarification on that. So Mike, when you mentioned some of the tasks that might be done during a bridge window, not our bridge, but that period between 1A and 1B, those funds are already accounted for in the future 1B. So it's just a drawing down of the eventual amount that will be needed to fund 1B, or what is that movement of funding?
We were anticipating that we would do those things early. If we started in April, we would have done those things early in 1B to inform it. So we're just pulling those out and doing them earlier so that we can make the decision. So it would have been something that you had to do during 1B if we had started in April. Not starting in April, we're trying to do things where you won't throw away that, and it'll have like a lifespan of longer than the project. So like going out and getting geotech information, once you know that, you know it for pretty much forever. So we're trying to get information like that. Getting the ROD, the biological opinion, the BA all cleaned up. Those are things that would last forever and would have needed to be done either way.
So those mapping of cash flow assumptions through 2025 have a buffer that could account for that scenario of a bridge window, or that is potentially something the commissioners are considering as work that could be done, but funding that we don't have to provide for it. Just trying to understand on the advocacy.
You have right now, it was part of what we did with Kiewit when we did the additional amendment to fund them through June. It would be continuing that through September and pulling some additional items out that we could do now under a reduced funding scenario to gain information that we would have to do anyways. So we could better inform ourselves, and we're watching that versus the money you have available. So that we're not, we're trying to balance those things. We're trying to, if we shut down now, send everybody home, you're going to lose all your staff. We're trying to minimize that impact, which all the design staff who went home, who we're going to get back, I don't know, because they are all out finding new stuff to do. So if we can minimize that, especially at the management level, we're trying to do that. So we're keeping a skeleton type crew for both in order to keep that consistency on the project. And trying to be effective in getting work done that isn't throwaway.
So we were trying to take the cash flow curve and do this for design. What we're doing is we're flattening it out.
Correct.
Okay, let's move on.
Arthur, do you have your hand up, or was that?
Yes, I do. I'm sorry, Mike, you just described some pretty complicated alternatives or different paths of getting through 1B. Is there some place where those are actually in graphical form or in writing? It was hard to follow.
No, we'll put together a one pager for you if you want. I can work with the funding committee to do that.
Well, my plan was to sit down with Grant to get him to explain it to me. So
Yeah, I mean,
one of those two
I'm happy to
options
do that
works
as well.
fine.
I mean, yeah, I'm happy to sit down with you too if you need that. That's not a problem. But yeah, if you want to do that.
I think the document would be helpful. It's then gives some transparency to the public.
Yep, and I will say the lifespan of the document is the date that we give it to you. So the next day it could change. Just want to put it out there.
But I think having just a one-page simple that we can put a pin in it, so you have a mark, because we know it's going to continually evolve.
As everybody
It's nice to have something that's stuck to the wall.
As long as everybody promises to agree that the date we pin it is the only date it's accurate on. I'm good with that.
There is a constant asterisk that says this is a forecast.
Yeah.
As of today.
It is a moving target.
It changes as of tomorrow.
Yep.
Yeah, that's
just
something
nice to have something
that's
something move for a bit, whether it's
I will
that's
try
something
to
we can
take
put-
all of what I just said and put that into something.
Yes, that's something we can easily put together.
Okay, let's move forward. On the legal report, if there's nothing new, if you could keep it really short and succinct, we'd really appreciate it. So start with, I guess, Judy.
Sorry. Good afternoon. Yeah, I've got a very brief report, Commissioner. The Foster Garvey has drafted a revision to the bylaws that clarifies that the executive director may not serve as a commissioner, and conversely, a commissioner may not serve as the executive director. That's a pretty standard clause that's in bylaws, and it's just been drafted by Foster Garvey. The only other report I have, somewhat related to Mike's report on funding, I guess, is the Port's attorney has prepared revisions to the intergovernmental loan agreement that would increase the maximum amount of the line of credit from $500,000 to $1 million. And Foster Garvey has reviewed and approved those revisions in discussions with the Port Authority, with the Port Attorney, I'm sorry. And those are the only two items I have to report on.
How about the second agreement to be able to use the toll revenue reserve for?
Yeah, sorry, Commissioner. Yes. That revision that was prepared would also authorize the use of the money in that incremental toll reserve account by the authority for reimbursable expenditures. So that is part of the revisions that Foster Garvey reviewed.
Okay. So I guess that's going to come to us next time.
You guys need to have a discussion about that. That is an informational
Oh,
item
okay.
today.
So we're going to hit that today. Good.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. Dan, how about a real quick brief? And by the way, Doug, thanks for joining. Doug Gibson. So Dan Marr, real short, if you would, please.
Sure. Thanks, Chair Fox. Hello from vacation. Been out more or less for the last week, back in the mix fully tomorrow. So I caught the end of the government relations reports. So I've got a little bit more catching up to do, but got a few items, obviously preparing for a DC trip. This may have been mentioned earlier, but as we're waiting for the risk workshop report to be out, we'll be using that on a suite of messaging updates, one-pagers, website updates, et cetera, just kind of squaring up how we talk about the project, where we're at in the timeline, and what to expect out of the next couple of years. So I imagine that will be a lot of what I'll be working on in the next week.
Okay, thank you. Looking through partner updates, Federal Highways, ODOT, WashDOT. Rob, I see you're on. Do you have anything for us?
I just had a question. If I remember, are your congressionally directed spending earmarks, are they lumped into that infra grant nowadays?
Yes, they are.
Yep.
Okay, that's all I had a question on. I wish they weren't, but because those are moving. Those are moving and not the grants. So
Yeah.
If you know a way to,
For white salmon.
or somebody to talk to separate those, I'd love to have the name.
Okay.
that was a question. I'll pass it on. So okay.
Anybody else? I don't see anybody else from our teaming partners. Okay. Consent agenda, the invoice review. Mike?
The invoices are in the packet, so.
I'll make a motion to approve the invoices in the consent agenda.
Second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And Doug, you're going to be voting now. I need to hear you. Yep. Okay, thank you. Committee reports, if we could try and keep them short, but funding and finance.
I'll try to keep it brief. We should be getting a new PCE update given post-risk workshop in about a couple weeks or so. So loose worksheet because we love Excel worksheets. Like on the ARPA funding, do we need to talk about the ARPA stuff?
Or yes, if you want to talk about that now, we can do that now.
Sure. So related to,
We have it as an art informational item if you want it.
okay, I'll let you bring that up in later. Okay. I'm going to meet with Mike hopefully later this week to go over evaluating the ED position and finding out financial fits, see what makes sense. And then one other request I have of us is I would like to send a letter requesting for us to request from the county to waive the fees that we have in our work regarding the paperwork to do the loan agreement. So I would like us to make that request for Hood River County.
What is the amount of those
To
fees?
waive legal fees.
Well, legal fees, sorry. You said fees. I was thinking it was
37,000.
paper or something.
Yeah.
Arthur?
It's 37,000.
37.
Yeah, so I would like us to make a request, right, that just as a request.
That's just a request. So the
Yep.
commissioners over the
Yeah.
Either Eric or I can move to make that request to motion.
sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, I probably need Arthur to recuse himself. I guess.
Yeah, that's, I was about to point out, I will be recusing myself, so
They're not
hopefully-
actually.
Yeah.
I'm in.
Okay.
Okay, so, well, Nate's not here, so
Is
where is
Catherine?
Jake?
Catherine.
Catherine will do it. Yep.
No, I will make the motion that we draft a letter to the Board of the Hood River County Commissioners requesting to waive the fees incurred in the cost of the loan application through Hood River County.
I'll second.
All in favor?
I have a question.
Sorry.
So if they are waived, who carries that cost? Is it something we're asking the county to pick up?
Yeah.
That's what-
Yeah, it's not waive is actually not, waive is not the right term. You're asking the county to pay it.
That could, the law firms would absorb that, and it TBD. That's why it is only a request at this point.
So do we need to amend to clarify that we're not asking them to waive, but we're asking to not be held accountable for any legal fees that are part of exercising the loan?
Tomato.
I think it
I
is.
mean, I think it's a formal action, so I think,
There's a difference.
yeah, there's a difference.
I'll second Marla's request. Sorry.
For the modification of the first.
Yeah, so we modified the motion, well, we need to take a vote on that amendment first.
The first one?
The one I just said, so to clarify, the amendment would be to modify the motion on the floor to indicate that we would be asking to not be held accountable for any legal fees associated with exercising the loan.
Let's change it to fees rather than just legal fees, because there's more than just the legal side. It's also the organization, the bond counsel side of it.
So,
I don't know what's on the floor anymore now.
Yeah.
I can't second it.
Do we have?
You can let the original motion die and then just make a new one. That's
yeah, let's do a new one. Instead of modifying it 3 times.
I need to vote to let her die since it was second.
I would like to put motion up to dismiss all the current
You can
emotions.
just let the motion.
Yeah, I think it just died.
Died.
Seconded.
It's dead.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Well, there's no motion.
Oh, my God.
You know, if it never was seconded, there's nothing to move on. So we still need a, it
It
was.
was second.
Oh, God.
So we would vote it down. We would
Yeah.
vote no on it, and then we would do a new motion.
Yes.
So if that's what we want to do, we would vote no
On the original motion.
on the original motion.
Okay. Original motion.
So all those in favor.
All in favor? Everybody's quiet. All opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
Hey.
So I have a question.
Doug,
This is
nay.
not just about legal fees. We are asking as an agency for this other agency to not hold us accountable for any fees associated with a loan that we're asking them for.
Their costs associated with it. You know, we had costs associated with it on our side, coming up with it. We're at this time, we're not currently going to exercise that loan. We may in the future still need to exercise that loan. We don't know right now, but right now they've got to pay the bills and they need to know whether or not to send us a bill for their portion of those fees. Usually when you exercise the loan and you start drawing on it, then we would have to pay our side of it or all of it. But the fact that we don't need it at this time, we're just leaving it open and we're asking the county in essence to, hey, can you guys eat this as part of that local contribution? Washington, we're asking for a potential grant in Washington. You guys are putting forward yours and it's something else that we can show that is the local contribution.
So why don't you bring forward a motion?
But anyways, all this,
Yeah, bring a motion. I mean, we need a motion to talk about it, so.
My last one died, so I'll make it again. I would make a motion that we direct staff to write a letter requesting that all fees associated with the county's expenses for the short-term loan, that the county would cover those costs.
Have a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Well, now we have discussion.
Yeah.
So I have a question. So are there ongoing fees that other agency is incurring as we continue to not draw from that loan?
No.
Or are these past fees? And so there's a singular bill that we are asking them to not issue to us.
Past fees are not accruing and not increasing.
And we know what that amount is, and that's the 37,000?
Finite, yes.
And we had a similar cost on our side reviewing documents and negotiating it. So it's basically two public agencies trying to do the best for the community.
Yeah.
We both hold on to whatever we did
And that's
and
as
deal with it until such time as
Yeah.
it
and
gets
that is
exercised.
as of today. That does not preclude us coming back together and working at some point in the future as well.
And if they do that, we'll memorialize this as an in-kind match for that amount on the project, just to keep track. We keep throwing around a lot lately, in-kind contributions or local match. And I think we should keep a running record for the history of this project for the future commissioners and everyone to be clear on what we consider the tally from any of these other partners.
And that's, I think, why the partner needs a request from us, is so that they can authorize it through their board, and then it can become an in-kind match that we can then keep on our books as that.
Yeah, I'm just making sure. I just want it heard that we are keeping a tally and a record of these different things we're considering to be a match, not just a action in business.
Can we take a vote? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passed. Anything else, Grant? And your report?
Everything else is going to be covered next.
Okay.
Or soon.
Let's do an engineering.
So most of the information we are going to be covering in the informational items, but the items that we as a committee wanted to bring to everybody's attention is that the risk workshop update is really important. We went through a lot of risks and a lot of people are involved in that. So thank you to both our federal partners, our board, all the contributions for that. The main thing we wanted to point out was that the in-water work window of 2025 is no longer possible to start construction. The in-water work window of 2026 is also probably not an option because of funding. If we do have a huge cash influx in the very near future, that might change. But at this point, in-water work window of 2026 is probably not occurring. And then as a reminder, just to highlight it and to bring it out, every year we delay is approximately between $40 and $44 million on the project. So every year that we don't get funding, we are using more money just to hold on to what we have. That is all I have, sir.
Okay. Communications.
Okay, I'll keep this brief, keep us on track. A couple notes. I would say that what we want to bring forward for the full committee, just areas of attention. I think we're behind on having a message out to the public. I think that should have already been out there. In our last committee meeting, we asked staff to give to us kind of a bullet list of the different things based on actions at the federal level where our project may be impacted, but the goal there is to be furnishing as soon as possible a statement, acknowledging to people what I think is the elephant in the room. There's definitely been a lot of questions. Hopefully you're all getting them in your inbox. I sure get them in mine. So that's underway. We are interviewing some PR firms this week, and I just want to call attention because I'm not sure it was really talked about, but JLA left the project last month. I think that's an unfortunate loss for this project. And I think some of that is the effect of changing people and maybe not some of the historical knowledge of how we brought an owner's rep on board, and that owner's rep was obligated to provide some communication services. And so while we're interviewing PR firms right now, that was originally identified as a need to cover crisis communications. We've talked as a committee, we want to move forward with, we had already had the RFP out there, but I think in the interviews, we're now going to be evaluating other needs because currently this project is not really supported for public information or anything outside of the contracted lobbyists and internal staff that's to wrangle the government relations side. So I think that is a key area of focus right now actively for that committee. The other thing I would say is despite that, we are identifying right now some efforts around local outreach. As I mentioned, a statement that's really our update and intended to be transparent and consistent. So once it's out there, we would ask that everybody's kind of speaking to those key points, but also making sure that the authority is going to all the local agencies and local community organizations with project updates. We want to bring back a more consistent schedule, either quarterly or twice a year. And then just a flag for later today, we want to pull from the informational items, item III, that inadvertently got added to the packet before it actually left the committee. It's a draft on a policy regarding representation for any lobbying activity. And I'll just flag that there has not been a policy. This is something I've called out since the fall that we should implement, but the trips that have happened to this point were done without any deliberation or discussion from the comms committee itself. And I think that we should be having some sort of structure to determining, first, based on the message we need to deliver, how we staff a trip to Salem or Olympia or DC, just in light of a majority of the day we've spent talking about how critical funding is needed, and that if we're investing in these trips, we need to be very deliberate and intentional about the message that's getting delivered and who those communicators are. So hopefully that policy comes back before you soon. Obviously, you've seen it. You'll see that it still was in a workshop state. So if you have thoughts, let myself, Nate, or Jake know, but we are hoping to get that back to you. I think that's it.
I would have just appreciated if you wanted to pull that from the agenda. If we had a discussion on the agenda up front, we should have pulled it at that.
Oh, we should have pulled it. That's right. Well, it's under informational items. So since it's not a business item, it's not under consent and it's not under action or unfinished business. I inferred that informational items were of a discussion nature, but
okay,
FYI.
let's move on. Risk workshop.
One quick clarification, the PR from procurement is not a public procurement. It's a, we're just bringing HNTBs up.
Okay. Let's go to risk workshop under informational or new business.
All right, so Leah, are you still on? I know she may.
I'm still here.
There you are.
There I am.
All right, so Leah's with our national group. She helps to facilitate risk workshops with FHWA and run the model. I will caveat she is not the risk inputter or the development of risks on this project. She just simply takes what we give her, inputs it into the model, runs the model, and produces what the model says. So I appreciate her help on that. And we have a presentation that she's going, myself and her are going to do, and give you an update on what came out of that risk workshop. So, Amy, are you pulling it up?
What? Mike, are you guys running the slides or did you need me?
Yeah, Amy's pulling it up now.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Amy.
Full screen, please.
Yeah. Thanks. Okay, so just I wanted to give folks a kind of an overall picture of how the risk process fits into the federal process. So the project is more than $500 million. And so because of that, it's deemed a major project. And so there are a few extra checkpoints that the FHWA looks at, to just kind of assess the project, see how things are going. And so one of those is a CSRA. So that's the cost schedule risk assessment workshop that we just had a couple of weeks ago. The outputs from that go into the financial plan, and then that's what that and the project management plan are things that FHWA needs to have approved before they'll authorize funds for construction. I'm happy to share other details on it, but it is kind of boring unless you like those sorts of things. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the process itself unless folks have questions. But that's kind of the background and why we did the workshop that we did a couple of weeks ago. Next slide. So the purpose of the CSRA, and this is straight from FHWA, this is the same information that they share. It is really to just have an unbiased risk-based review of the accuracy, the reasonableness of the project's cost and schedule. It isn't, FHWA will say the same thing when they give these similar types of things. It's not a gotcha. They're not looking for surprises, and that's not the point of the workshop either when a consultant facilitates them. We really just want to have good discussion and develop consensus on what the risk inputs are. So out of the model, we get a probability range. I think we have a graphic on that or a table for what the anticipated cost and schedule completion milestones would be based on different intervals, like confidence intervals. And so again, it's consensus based. We talk through the variability in the base estimate and schedule. We talk about the effects of market conditions, whether they're going to be better or worse than planned, how likely they are to happen that way. And then we go through the risk register and talk about the likelihood and impacts of the major risks. So this is a summary of the base input. So we had FHWA has categories that they like to input in their model. So we've grouped the cost by year of expenditure for how we put them in the model. So sorry, was there a question?
Go ahead.
James
Okay.
is okay.
Okay. So the first was prior fixed costs. Those are things that are expended through, I think, the end of January. And then anything remaining on contracts that are signed, but that hasn't been spent, because those costs aren't going to vary. They're not going up, they're not changing with inflation, they're done. So we group them in that bucket. The next one is project oversight. So that's, agency costs, agency consultants. I think ODOT's time was in there. H&TB's time is in there. Anything that is more on the project management side and helping with delivery. Preliminary engineering is the estimate of design for phase 1B. And so that was taken from the ICE's estimate, and it was a certain percentage of design, if I recall right. Construction is the ICE's estimate. That was what we used as the basis. Talking with FHWA, it's not necessarily correct to use the contractor's estimate. They like to see an engineer's estimate. In lieu of that, they were fine using the ICE estimate. Construction engineering is a second, it's a carve out from the phase 2 estimated costs for actually overseeing construction, doing quality control, the materials testing lab fees, things like that. Right of way is the last one, and that's for just acquisition of the needed parcels. And so each range, each cost category has a range of variability. So -5 to +10, 0 to 15, -10, +10. Those were all discussed through the workshop, and then market conditions are applied to construction. So the better than planned market conditions, we assumed it would be 10% under, and that was with a 20% likelihood. And then for worse than planned, that's 20% over, and again at a 20% likelihood. So that means 60% of the time in the model runs, it would come in as planned. And then the milestone dates that we used for the schedule modeling, the planned start of phase 1B was April 2025 with a finish 12 months later. And then the phase 2 construction would be starting in June. So
Leah?
Yes.
Just to interrupt, I don't want people to think that this is the lowest level of detail in your model. This is an extreme summary. There was 40, 50 items, individual items that were on the register that got scored.
Yes, we had a lot of good discussion during that workshop. And yes, this is a high level, very high level roll up. Again, happy to share details, but I don't know if everybody enjoys it as much as I do and Mike seemed to. So we wanted to keep it high level. And like I said, happy to share details with folks after. So it looks like I just on the schedule, it sounds like a few dates are changing. We won't update and rerun the model with FHWA. This is a snapshot in time. I believe Mike's Shannon's going to talk about it later, but there will be an update CSRA as we get closer to construction. Next slide. Yes. So just to kind of summarize, as Commissioner Fox noted, we had a number of items and some good discussion on them. So just overall to summarize the risk register, we had 54 threats and 75 opportunities. So it's almost 70 individual risks, not counting the ones that we retired or switched to just monitor only, or had some updates on and realized they might be included in the base. And so just about 70 risks went into the model. Key threats were, again, delays in a lot of delays because there is a significant cost associated with time delay during construction. And so one was missing the 2026 in-water work window. Another, big risk drivers were delays in the permits, the environmental decision. We had quite a discussion on the capacity of the federal and state agency reviewers, especially FHWA's capacity. And I think it was touched on earlier. Folks are just in a waiting period, and we know they're doing their reviews. That was a really hard risk to try to characterize. And then just construction in general, staff, market conditions, long lead procurement, availability of materials, weather, things like that. There were some discussions on key opportunities. One was construction efficiencies. So how can we get improved production rates? Again, weather, maybe weather is great and we don't have as many days as are assumed in the base schedule. And then some alternate access to improve constructability. Some other key areas were around design refinements, a couple of things related to the bridge foundations, maybe using shallower foundations, depending on how the geotech information comes out, and then, efficiencies around bridge demolition. All right, so this is the summary of the output of the model. And so what we have are, these are the model runs. And so the cost to complete, excluding the prior expenditure. So everything, risks, market conditions, variability, all of those items. The 70 percentile is what FHWA requires that project funding be budgeted at. It's never a fund. It's a little more conservative than the 50%. But on major projects, they do want this to be a little bit more conservative. So you'll see it highlighted there. The 70% cost to complete is 1.183 billion, and then excluding risk, so just the base variability and market conditions is just under 1.1 at 1.092. And then you can see the completion date, that 70th percentile is pushing out into the first quarter of 2032.
So Leah, if I can interrupt one more time here, when you're looking at the intervals, minimum 10, 20, 30, 50, what does that really mean? When FHWA picks 70% mark, that means there's a 70% chance of an underrun below those numbers as the final outcome of the project.
Yes, yep, that's correct. 70% likely to come in at or under that number.
Am I also correct that if you look at cost to complete excluding risk, the 1092, we have to add 30 million to it, correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
So that comes in real close to the 1120.
Yes.
What I would say is this, what this really tells us is that our cost is settling down. We know what the risks are. We know now more variability of where we could be, and it's not an exact number. But a lot of times people want to speak to a number. FHWA included likes to speak to a number. This gives us a range of where we think we will be on this project. There could be things that increase it above this. There could be things that go below this. At the 15% design stage, this is where we are.
Arthur has his hand raised.
Yeah, is cost of money, is that one of the risks that's built into this formula, or is that done externally?
As far as inflation?
Yes.
So the model assumes 4% inflation. We haven't added a discrete risk if inflation is higher. We certainly can do that on future iterations.
But you do have in your model cost and complete, the first column, you do have schedule risk, and the schedule risk does include cost of escalation for the extension, right?
Yes, that's correct. Yes, it
I
picks it
think
up that way.
answers Arthur's question.
Okay.
Partially. Also, what year? So in the last slide, you said it was that the dollars were in the years expended. In this chart, what dollars are these?
They're also year of expenditure.
Okay, so is there some place where we see the cost in dollars?
Not in this slide deck. I think that's something we can provide out of the model.
I'm just wondering how different is that going to be? Am I going to care about that?
I don't know offhand what the difference was. I'm happy to look.
Okay, thanks.
So a couple things to add to this is there's a report that will be completed. It's going to take about a month for Leah to get that report done. There'll be a draft and final version. We had talked about maybe a specific meeting separate for walking through anything related to this. So that is still something that we could do if we need to do that later. We will do another CSR update when we get to 60%. After we get the 60% OPC, it'll be an update of this workshop. So probably more like a 1-day event, not a 4-day event. And then we'll see where the project is at that point, and if it makes sense to do another one before we either go to construction or put it on the shelf, then we can have that discussion and determine whether a third one would be worth it. But given where the project is, the things that were identified, I think it makes a lot of sense to do another one at 60% a year from now.
So what's confusing here is when we've talked about money before, we've included it's been on a different basis. We've included contingency, we've included financing in this, and I think that that's not included in this. So it's going to be a little bit of apples to oranges comparison for the public trying to figure out what this represents.
That's actually all in here, Arthur. This is an all-in cost, contingencies, all of that. The risk, if you look at the excluding risk, that's a portion of your contingency and your ability to work off that contingency by mitigating those risks. So you could drive the cost down towards that number if you are able to eliminate or mostly eliminate those risks or take on some of the opportunities. You could work on driving that cost down.
Okay, so you believe that someone who's been following the various numbers that we've put out in the past, you believe that this is a fair, that this is a fair number, that these are fair numbers to follow on to that trail of numbers we've left?
I believe so, yes.
Thanks.
So the other thing that we did is at the very end, we added another $50 million onto what had come out for design allowances. And so that's also included in here. And so one of those things that we didn't have really thought about when we put out our previous numbers. The main thing that you see on here from those prices is the completion date is changed, because when we went through the risk analysis, most of the things that were risks added time, they didn't add costs. And that's the big key here is that the sooner we get in the water, the cheaper this thing's going to be.
And I didn't say it in this because we said it earlier in the day, was that, we're looking at an October 27. He was working on a schedule right now with a September design start and a construction start of October 27. So when they have that refined down, we can present that to the full board in a abbreviated P6 version, not the full P6, but a rolled up version of what that looks like.
So a word of caution here, the difference between the two columns is about $91 million. That $91 million, if we just ignore it and let it go by itself, it's going to get a lot bigger. So typically on projects, that difference there, which is your risk items, each risk item comes together with an action plan and a mitigation plan, and you actively monitor that and push it until you've decided that that risk is either accepted or we've worked it away. And a lot of projects that I've seen don't pay enough attention to that, and then that leads to a lot of surprises later on. So we've got an opportunity with HNTB and Kiewit to do it right. So we need to be pushing to see and manage that risk work-off list.
Yes, we're going to take these risks, put them back into the risk register, which is on the website. We'll put in the detail that was added, and then we will, as Mike said, we'll monitor those as the project progresses. That will be the next basis of the next risk register, will be what happened to those 70 risks and how have they evolved between now and 60% design. And we'll see what new things come up between now and then and add those, and new opportunities that come up between now and then and add those. So from here on out, you will always see a range of values that this project could be. You won't know the actual cost of this project until you put it out for bid and you get an actual bid from a contractor. Just, everybody kind of needs to understand that even if we're talking about a number, there is a range of values that come out of this project.
I have a question on the chart. So the maximum results with a completion date of 2034, are we to assume that that is indicating that we don't get into construction until a 2028 or 29 window?
6 to 7 years less than 34. So yeah, 27, 28, late 27, 28.
But I thought we said construction window was 4 to 5 years.
This also took into account a start of 26. So all these dates will get moved another year.
So the other thing is you got a bunch of things in there that can extend the time length that are when you're in construction, and anything when you're in construction and you extend that time length, it gets real expensive real fast.
The starting point of all of this started with an accepted assumption across the board of when we get in the water.
Yes.
So when that moves, that target moves, all of this in theory. Okay.
And if you remember, you got to kind of back yourself up on this. This was January of last year when we thought 26 was a possibility. As we get closer and closer, you're really probably at the point where, unless we get the money in the next couple months, 26 is most likely not a possibility.
My engineering report pointing out that this leads us to believe it probably won't happen 26 once we get influx.
We got a couple months, and we got a bit in next month, and we got in for next month, and the states came through in July. We
got a project
probably
again.
do everything we could to get in the water as quick as possible, which means we probably could hit 26. But there's a lot of really good things that have to happen, and we'll worry about that when it happens.
So for an action moving forward, the communications needs to know, we're not talking about a number, we're talking about a range. Is the recommendation from staff on this range of what we're marketing is a 20% to an 80%? So you're saying it's anywhere from 1.05 to 1.25? And that's something easy that's understood by the public, that here's the range of what.
Well, I would say,
That's what we need to talk about.
and I would say that the framing of how we want to speak to the project is really the responsibility of the commissioners. Staff is giving us information. Now the comms committee would take that. My off the cuff recommendation, and we've talked about this in different ways across this entire winter, but especially right now with so many uncertainties, less is more. I think we risk hurting our trust that we've built with the public by continuing to move the target. So I think we need to be migrating from specificity around a construction window to a general, and set a public expectation that what is still achievable on this project is we're all on a new bridge in the early 2030s. But I think staying high level, and so I say that as an example because my inclination would be we stay high level on a bridge cost. I think there's confusion, and as Arthur and other commissioners have shared, we know that this is dynamic and there's going to be ongoing uncertainty. But I would be inclined to say we're taking a staff recommendation of what is the highest number on this chart that gives us the best footing to start speaking about the project. And I would lean towards a $1.2 billion number. And if it comes in 1 billion, then there is a positive story down the road instead of continuing to be shifting a narrative. Effective communication is consistent, it's timely, and it's transparent. And I think we've struggled to find consistency because we keep trying to change the marker at each different point. So I think this is absolutely informative, and I really appreciate all the time that everyone put in, especially the commissioners that went to this. I know how exhaustive it's been, but I think this gives us now that information to be doing some course correction on how we start to communicate with the public and get them on board with the current state of this project.
Question for you. What's your thought on, if we're going to use the 1.2, should we be setting our funding grants for 1.2?
No, there's the work that needs to get done to move this project forward. The elevator pitch when you're stopped at the bakery or someone on the street asks you, hey, Commissioner Fox, Commissioner Thomas, this bridge really going to cost us 1.5 billion, or how much is this bridge costing us? That answer that we stand behind because it's rooted in some good findings is 1.2 billion. The maneuvering is very technical and administrative in terms of how we are doing our funding stack. And I think we risk damaging ourselves if we want to stay thinking that both have to be exactly the same, because it means we are going to constantly move the target. And we know how frequently we've talked about this bridge. And I think all of us know that we still encounter people who say, I have no idea what's going on. What do you mean the port doesn't own this project? Consistency is the core key focus of any successful communications plan.
So
And so-
1.2, I get it.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. Now let's talk about, we've got a BIP application out for $532 million. If they give it to us, and if we think the likely number is 1.2, we're underfunded. Should we go for another grant to get it up to the 1.2, or should?
Again, I think the general framing of that is we think that this project is one that will require 80% of federal funding. The way that we're positioning this is to pursue the maximum federal funding so that the contributions still shared across all entities are appropriate for the size and proportional. That gives staff the wiggle room if we get that BIP, and hopefully that's a scenario we're grappling with, because it means we're getting momentum in this new administration on favorability, but it means that we stay the same message, even if internally we are needing to pursue other funding. But what the public understands is it's moving forward. 1.2 billion is the target. Early 2030s, we're driving on a bridge. 3 tenants give us staff and the authority a lot of room to not be betraying public trust, to be keeping them informed. And obviously in our meetings, also publicly accessible, they can get in the weeds, but understandably people don't have time. And I think we'll be better served. And I think it gives maybe some of your question or what I'm hearing. Yeah, I think all of us know that we still need to have some flexibility, especially on these different areas that are moving, on construction and engineering, on advocacy at the state and federal level. So I don't want any side of the project to feel hamstringed because we've embraced and locked in stone a talking point that is 1.12 to 1.18 or something.
So here's where I was, public side, no problem. I'm now talking about, okay, funding from the governments. Right now, the funding package that we've got out there for consideration is $1.120 billion. And we've been fairly consistent for at least 3 or 4 months anyway. That correlates very nicely with the cost to complete excluding risk of the 1092 plus 30 million today. What it doesn't include is the other 90 million to include the risk piece of this thing at 1183 plus 30. So whatever that is, 1223. The feds want to set the target at 70%. So they're going to be looking for us to look for funding at the 70% mark. What I think we ought to be saying is, we understand that. We're going to do another one at 60%, which is towards the end of the year, if we can, in fact, start design in September. At that time, hopefully we can work some of that 1183 down. And then we set up another risk workshop. We come out with another set. And if we're still over the 1120, we're going to have to go get another grant, assuming that we got all the money. That's the way I think we ought to work this thing. We set the target on the outside at 120. But internally, we're working from these numbers here, but we don't react too quick today. We wait until 60% to make an adjustment.
Yeah, I'm just going on the information that's known to me. So a conversation or deliberation already happening in a different committee about a known future target of a 60%, you're going to reevaluate that. I just heard that 10 seconds ago. But again, that highest level public messaging allows those things to be moving through committees as needed. And clearly we're having to do this because of requirements at the federal level. And so I think this is not foreign to them as well, the understanding that there are shifting targets and they need some organization to all these projects of holding us to a threshold. If that fluctuates or changed, I think, those stakeholders, they're very well versed in this. So I'm not concerned about shifting future applications going in, I think that's probably considered standard on a project.
I just want to make sure we're transparent here. We're talking.
Yeah.
You don't need to necessarily crosswalk them all the way every day through the process. They'll crosswalk at certain points in time, but carry them along in parallel.
Yeah.
Okay. Other comments on the contingency analysis?
There's one more slide, I think, or did we get to the last?
Covered it.
We did this one?
You pretty much covered it.
Okay.
Okay. Hey, thank you, Leah.
So,
Thank you,
so
everyone.
at that 60%, so the same exercise happens fully again?
Yeah.
Got it.
It should be a lot quicker.
One day instead of 4 days.
Oh, well, we should know where we're at funding wise when we get to the 60%, because so much of this is funding and permits is what pushed this thing out.
Yeah.
And once you get to that point, you'll know, and then you can reduce those risks.
I guess not to open a can of worms, but in evaluating those risks and speaking to what Jim was bringing forward earlier, just a lot of the uncertainty and staffing at the federal level, were those current present day implications factored in? And is that something we might need to revisit before April 26 or a 60% or April 25?
Well, hopefully that stuff will get ironed out between now and next spring. If we're not a year into it and still under what we're under now.
If not, we got much
I mean,
bigger problem.
one realistic thing that we didn't, because it is happening and we don't know what it's going to do. There have been some very early indications of what it's going to do, is steel and some of the prices of all this tariff stuff that's going on. I don't know what that's going to do to it. So that will be something that will evolve between now and next year that we'll have to take a look at and figure out. But that could have a huge impact on the project.
So, yeah, so your 4% could be way low.
So we'll monitor it and see kind of what goes on over the next year and see what trends come out from a year from now. And
But we had some of that in there in the base model.
we did, yep.
And then I think the other thing that's worth pointing out is the tasks that Hewitt is pulling out to kind of keep moving forward between now and September. Several of those items were specific risks that were identified through this effort. And so we'll be able to identify those over the summer.
Check them off.
And some of them are actually.
If we get that far, that'd be great.
There was an issue that with the federal employee, like there was like how many days do you add for permits to be- so there was a lot of talk, and then there was actually pulling out, making sure we're not double counting things, like labor and then federal, but like it just, you can't double count, that's two different things. So there was quite a bit of discussion. This only happened a couple of weeks ago, so there was a lot of already.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. So this was a start date. That's recent.
Okay, if we can move on.
Hold on, I think we still got to go back. We kind of talked about 1.12. If that's where we want to go, and that's what
1.2.
1.2.
1.2 is what you were talking about, rather than using a range.
Yeah.
Then we need to find another $115 million.
No, again, I think,
In essence.
I think for people to wrap their heads around it, 1.183 rounded up gets you to 1.2 So, right?
But rounding up, that is so much money to round it up, and I was just concerned that it's.
So
Okay, well, then I would
1.13 is not the right number.
target, but then we are going to continue to chase it like we have done in the past, and that causes confusion, and we have yet to be successful. We were very consistent. We were successful with a former price tag that started resonating with people and was in their heads.
Yeah.
We are trying to re-educate right now. So jumping to 1.18 right now and then committing to a new number, April of 25, and at each threshold, I think is going to be, and this is just my opinion, we're a body of other opinions, but I would advise and recommend that that would walk us down a path of less consistency and resonation. That's not really a word, but resonating with the public what the cost of the bridge is.
So let me interrupt. The problem with that chart, you quoted 1.183. Okay, and
The 70%.
this was gonna happen.
Yeah.
It's not the right number. You have to add 30 to it.
Yeah. So there you go. So we're already at the 1.2.
I don't know why we have to do a price tag though. So, I mean, my concern is we're at how much percent? 15? And we're doing this at 60. And every time we do it, we're getting better information. We're having a more refined number. So we have to change the number. We have to assume that the public is smart enough. We have more information. That's why the numbers change.
I think it's not about assuming the public is smart enough. It is about assuming that the message and the channels where they're accessing it in their day-to-day are consistent enough with the same message over time for something to resonate.
Right.
There are plenty of studies that show you need to hear even a simple thing, maybe in your own home, like cleaning the dishwasher or put this away a certain way, at least 3 times for it to register. We are in a space where we don't have a local media market outside of a weekly newspaper. We're relying on our own channels of communication. We do not have a lot of active public participation on the project, but top of mind in a day-to-day atmosphere is crossing this bridge. And so I think we would be best served by figuring a number. And if that means right now we talk about it, which is already somewhat out there, if it's $1 billion project, then maybe that is the wiggle room we want to use. I mean, I think that's up for us to figure out. Staff has given us some really good insight, but Mike raises a good point. And that's where I think there is a danger of getting to any single number down to dollar amounts. We are going to chase that, and that will fray a message.
I'll tell you, out in the community, when I talk to people, they get them confused between 1.12 and 1.21. So if we just started using the rounded term, approximately $1.2 billion, that's the project. That's kind of the project. That it's a big project, 1.2 billion. And then we use the lower level numbers, and it's going to move around some for our funding.
Yeah,
I think that makes it really simple and easy for people to understand. It's a $1.2 billion project.
Yeah. Yeah.
We will do the best we can to reduce that.
Got to.
I mean, we need, what is most pressing in my mind is we need a new number that we're owning. And we need a general target. And my recommendation on the general target is that we focus on the bridge opening. That is what's top of mind to people. When am I going to, is this actually going to happen? Which I'm sure you're all getting as well. And when am I going to be on this new bridge? And so I think already we're confident to start saying early 2030s. 2029 is not practical. Again, by going to these other versions, if something happens, this perfect scenario, and we're somehow magically going to go in the ground in 2026, don't we want that good story? Like, that's the great update. We over-delivered and under-promised, but I think that some of the lessons learned through last summer and into the fall is our first big cost increase came. We should now build upon. And I think figuring out a range that gives the comfort to the contractors and staff and the people working on this project, because our main focus here is delivering the bridge. So what is the number that puts the public at ease, that gives all the commissioners a number where we feel confident repeating it? And we're not going to get blindsided in 3 months with an, oh, by the way, we were thinking we were at the 1.092 plus 30 million, but now we need to jump to 1.125 plus 30. Like, I'm hard to see an argument for needing to stay that. Yeah.
So that was kind of, I think, the discussion why you would say there's a range. It's $1 billion to 1.25 is the total project, because at the 70% number, you have a 70% chance of underrunning that. So your actual numbers at the 50%, you're 50-50, right? That's where you would be. And so that's why the 20% to the 80% gives you the range of, if things go good, this is what it is. If things go bad, this is what it is. If we never get the funds, the bridge never gets built, doesn't matter. And so that's why, do we want to come out and 3 months after we said it's 1.12, which kind of blew the world up. Now we're saying, oh, it's another 70, $80 million more. It's like, well, where did $80 million come from? Well, 50 of that was because we just put in a single $50 million design growth in there. Did it come from any numbers? We just stuck it in there at the last minute. And so that's why, for me, using a range makes a lot more sense. It's between $1 billion and 1.25, and that all comes down to pretty much when we go in the water.
And just for public information, our 50% number in this scenario is 1.12. It's just that the guidelines we have to use at the 70% level makes it the 1.183. So
And so
that number is the same number that we've been.
I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying that there's a different way we can talk about this in public. We can talk about this as a number, because the one thing we've done is we went with 500, we went with 520, we went with 1.12. You know, it's going to continue to progress, and we know it's going to be in a range, and we know there's a lot of things happening at the federal government level, permit wise and funding wise, that we don't know what the world's going to look like. But right now, this is where we're at, according to our ICE.
Yeah, I mean, listen, we all received this. I think certainly what we are landing on is how we publicly message the price tag is something all the commissioners need to be on board with. So the comms committee can bring the recommendation, but, or if we think that we've had enough discussion and we want to just settle on where we want to land right now. I mean, we just did the risk review. So, I mean, again, a lot of this is off the cuff conversation, but I do think the key points, whether it's a range or a number, is that we are all on board with consistency. And so whatever we're saying, whatever direction we want to go, I think we need to be figuring out the direction that gives us the lifespan we need out of the number in our, I mean, we sat there with the 500 million range for 4 years, from about 2020 through 2024. And, you know, certainly a little bit too long, but it seems the project's far enough along, if we're doing this level of analysis, that we're getting more firm numbers. And so I think this first wave over this next year is really that education and ownership of this is $1 billion bridge project. And in that sense, that general catch-all covers, like whether it's the 1.2 or the 1, but I think that's really where we need the public to start when we are catching them and wherever they're going to engage with us, that takeaway. It's a big project. It's going to require a lot of money. It's really not going to move forward unless we see 80% coming from the feds, quite likely. So
we still need, I think we need to make a decision, because we've got a lot of things going in front of we're going in front of the legislature, we're going in front of our local agencies, we're going to DC. And at least if you say, you know, we've got a funding plan in place for 1.12, this project's going to cost anywhere from 1 to 1.25. Depends on when we get in the water. The sooner you give us money, the sooner we can be on the lower side of that. But if we change the 1.12 number, now we've got all sorts of other things that kicks in terms of where's that additional money coming from? And what's your plan? Do you even have any grant applications for it? Are you going to do that through?
I think those questions are already out there. And again, I guess, you know, back to checking the clock, but are we using committees to work through some of these? We've received this. I think this is good feedback. And I think this is another topic later in our meeting, but I would say that this is something to get deliberated through the comms committee, which includes the representation of our lobbyists and our staff that's touching it from a GR perspective. And we are coming back with that recommendation. And then that recommendation as a body, based on that review and bringing it forward, the body is being asked to decide, do you want to go with that recommendation, or is there deliberation on an alternate? This feels a little ad hoc and not how we handle things from other committees. So I think this is good discussion. I think it certainly helps to inform like how I take this back to Nate and Jake, since they're not here today. But I would say that if we're being true to the structure of our committees, this is something where we've all been in receipt of the work that was done. It's now going to go back. We'll bring a recommendation. The full board either accepts it or they revise it.
I guess I would just say that on this one, this is the overall number of project and what we're talking about. To me, that's not the committee discussion. That's the whole board discussion.
I agree.
Yeah.
And you know, I know this meeting's going long, but we've had a lot of important things to discuss. Our last meeting was short. I think we can easily say that we shouldn't be only having one meeting a month, because that's what happens in these meetings. But I think this is really time sensitive, because we have a lot of things coming and we don't really have time to go back unless we're going to just stick with the 1.12 for right now until something changes. But that's something that those of us who are going to any other meetings coming up need to know. What's the talking point at this time, and what does the board feel comfortable?
Well, I think what Marla laid out, what I think I heard is there's messaging that is public messaging. We also have a lot of advocacy that we need to do with the legislature. That's probably a little bit different conversation. It's probably more detailed. The bridge is going to be somewhere right around 1.2, give or take. And what we're talking about is give or take 200 million, which I think we're getting hung up on. But in terms of a level of accuracy that people stick in their head when you have a conversation on the sidewalk, they're not going to hold more than 1.2. Yes, when we go talk to our representatives, we need to be able to articulate what that is and isn't. But I think that's a different conversation. I think that's what Marla suggested.
And Arthur's got his hand raised.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, Arthur,
First.
go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, this was an interesting conversation. So first of all, no one who I speak to, legislators or the members of the public, thinks that we know precisely what this bridge is going to cost. Everyone gets the fact that there is uncertainty to this. And my input number 2 is we have too many digits, that it's either 1.1 or it's 1.2. And honestly, I heard good arguments for both. I don't care at this moment. I mean, each time one of you spoke, I agreed with you. It's yeah, that's right. It should be 1.2. No, it should be 1.12. Okay, so I'm not going to weigh in on that, but I'm going to say it should be 2 digits because no one can remember that. So 2 digits, and recognize there's uncertainty, and people are going to not be surprised when things change a little bit in the future.
In my opinion, if we think it's really going to be somewhere between 1 and 1.2, I'd just say 1.2 and then make everybody happy if we in fact get it for less than that.
My only concern is if we say 1.2, and this just because I've had literally talked to a senator staff, and then the next day the information has changed. If let's say they have any legislation staff on here, like we are 15% design, so let's all admit we're 15% design. That's when this was done. 85% to go. The numbers will change. The dates are going to change. The amounts are going to change. But if we give them 1.2, and then end of March, a group of people are going, well, it's actually going to be 1. I mean. I think I'm wording for a range, because a range allows you to go high and allows you to go low. And a range is also 15%. You're like, this is what it's looking like at 15% design. This is the range, and this is the date range too. So you do a amount range and you do a time range, because early 2030s is you're giving them a time range.
I mean, again, I
So
think some of that is about your audience. An audience that's informed and educated on the project, which is a partner, that is a different audience than your neighbor or people in the grocery store in this community that are trying to understand. And the one thing I would caution about range, because I think this is a good discussion around, we're only at 15%. A range implies certainty about the end result. A range indicates that it will never be higher than the top of that range. So a single number of, at this point in time, we think that this project will cost us about 1.2 billion. And then in the future, having to expand that potentially, hopefully not. But I guess I would be more comfortable about a range if there was absolute certainty in the room that there is no way the project's going to go above the ceiling of the range. And I think that that's a hard thing based on everything we keep reviewing. And it kind of betrays the theme that we continue to reinforce, which is this project is very dynamic. How do we build and reinforce trust with the community that's already established through a period of uncertainty on the project? And I think through the period of uncertainty, getting everyone's heads wrapped around a single number, whether it's, and I agree with Arthur, it's a good point about 2 digits max. So 1.1 or 1.2. And if next year we are absolutely certain that that new number, these new exercises, it's quite unlikely we will be at 1.2. It's going to have to go to 1.5. Then you jump it, but I don't know.
I think if we're talking $1.5 million bridge, we do not have a project.
Well, and again, I think there's good discussions that have been raised, but there's that elephant in the room that continues on this project, which is when are we going to start talking very practically about scenarios of this project where we are at a point where funding is not there and it is going to sit on a shelf, and what are we doing to prepare us for that conclusion?
So that part I think we're doing now, right? And I think we've done that with the adjustment to the STIP. We're doing that by saying we're only going to move into phase 1B. The feds will not allow us to move into the next phase until we have all funding. So the only thing that is on our radar right now is getting through a signed and sealed set of plans. And until we have full funding, there's really no reason to talk about construction.
Mm-hmm.
But you should have a plan. Right? And we're gonna have to do a financial plan for FHWA that will be due at 60%. That number that they will, FHWA, if you ask them or someone asks them what this project should be funded at, they are going to use that 70% number. And they will continue to use that. That's what's going to be in the report. That's what they're going to use. And they are okay with it adjusting again at 60% or right before construction. But when you talk to them, they're going to say it's the 70% number and here's what it was. And they're going to use that number. Now they'll round it off, whether they call it 1.2 or 1.22 or whatever, they'll probably round off to one digit, but that's what they're going to use. That's what they will require us to put in the financial plan. That's what they will require us to use to say this project is financially feasible. They will require us to have that much money in the bank before they will allow us to go to construction.
I mean, to me, that answers some of these questions right now of deliberation. Like that is a rule that's guiding us to this line item. And so I think the deliberation is about what is the 2-digit version of that line item that gives us the certainty to be saying something that is rooted in a good finding while work continues to move forward. And we know there's going to be these ebbs and flows.
And I don't think it's necessarily bad or wrong to have a message to the public and a more detailed message to people that need a more detailed message, right? But we have to be able to answer that question as well, because somebody will see 1.2 and then you go meet with them and they'll be like, well, why are you asking for 1.8? I thought your number was 1.2. You're always going to have that. And I'm going to keep telling you all, none of this is guaranteed until you get a bid from the contractor. So just keep that in the back of your mind.
I think just for recall, this has always been a dynamic. There's always been the internal acknowledgement deliberation that a lot of our pie charts, even when we ignore which audience we were in front of, but we've never actually maintained like true adherence to the actual dollar line of, even when we were under the old funding picture of 520 to 550. If you really were to get technical about the 2020 build and the appropriation this year and this year. So there's always been that acknowledgement of there's a way that you're speaking to it. There's a way you're visually getting people to wrap their heads around it. And then there are the particulars and the nuts and bolts of an application and the real like paperwork you're signing.
That number will be matched up when we go to the feds to what you saw on here. So from a technical standpoint, that number will be what they will want to see on future applications and stuff.
So I'll give you one last thought here. I think we're trying to drive to the third position to the right of the decimal point when something is accurate to the 12th position to the left of the decimal. When you take a look at funding is so unknown on this project, it could swing years very easily. And I would say, just make it easy. Today, it's 1.2 billion. We're going to be looking at it. We're driving hard to try and drive cost out of the project. We don't know when funding's coming. When we get to 60%, we'll take another look at it. If all of a sudden we get a bunch of funding tomorrow, we'll redo it. I don't think we're going to have that challenge, but
So if that's the direction the board wants to go, I think we also need to have the conversation of where the other 95 million is going to come from, because our funding partners are going to ask us that. And at some point that's going to have it come into one thing, and that's going to be tolls, because we know we're not going to get any more from the states. And that another $95 million, that's going to have to come from the locals. And we need to start doing that math.
Yeah, and so this is where we have to have the discussion that Marla was suggesting, which is the gaming of options, which we talked about at last meeting. I brought that up, and I'd like to reiterate that I get the fact that we're not talking now about moving beyond phase 1B. That's great. What does that mean? You can't drive on a plan. So what does that mean that we're actually doing as a group? We're obviously thinking about more than that. So we need to have the ability to communicate what we're doing beyond that, and discussions like, how do you meet if it turns out to be much more expensive? What sorts of things are you going to what sorts of options are there for finding additional funding, et cetera? We have to talk about all of that. We have to have a good, solid session on that so that we know what we're saying to the public.
Well, I think if you called it round number 1.2, our real number today that we've been working to is 1.120. That's what our funding plan shows. I would say leave that alone until we get more information on when are we going to get our funding.
Yeah, I'm not talking about
That key decision is going to drive, we gotta increase our funding profile. Because we're pushing the schedule out. And we don't know that yet. We do know it's going to move. We don't know how much.
He's asking though, Arthur, do you want to repeat your question? I think he's asking a different.
Yeah, I'm
side of
asking
that.
for, I'm fine with all the discussion about what we do with the 1.12, 1.2. I have no problem with any of that. We also stated that currently we're simply talking about going phase 1B. There's the gaming of options of what happens down the road that we have to be doing now. And we have to be looking at things like, what happens if there's no BIP program? What happens if there's if infra doesn't allow the bifurcation? What happens if steel prices go up by 50%? What happens if there's all these different worlds that we may be living in the future, and at least some mapping out of, when do you pull the plug? What does pulling the plug look like? How many different plugs can you pull? We really should be having that discussion. I think that that's only a reasonable thing to do, or else we look delusional, because the public knows that we're in a very unknown world now, and for us to be projecting that we're just moving forward, business as usual, that's going to seem weird.
I mean, I would make a motion that we ask staff to consider setting a date for a scenario workshop. And we get organized and schedule a meeting where we have that discussion deliberation, because I think that is the top of mind thing that really can't get delegated out to a committee, but informs the decisions that are happening in all the committees across communications, funding, and construction.
Like, when do you give a stop work order? I guess is like, at what point is that actually, is that where is Arthur, is that?
To me, it's pretty
That's
simple,
one of-
right? You've
one
got
of
the
many-
funding. I'm sorry, go ahead, Arthur.
That's one of many possible things. I don't want to focus on stop work, but there are the future, the further you get in the future, it's the ripples on the pond effect. The further you get in the future, the wider the set of options there are. I think that the public at this point, given the lack of certainty, the high degree of uncertainty in the world right now, I think it's reasonable for us to game out the more probable or more possible options for what our future may look like, so that people know that we're thinking about more than just having our heads down and pretending that everything's the same as it always has been. And we're waiting for the feds to come in and tell us when we get the BIP money.
Okay. Save it for a meeting if we're going to do
Well,
something.
I think what you're trying to say here is that we need to look at a number of, I call them off ramps, but decision points going down the road. 4 years ago, my goal was to be in the water constructing October this year. Internally, my goal has changed now with the environment. My goal now is to get through design. Then it gets built when it gets built. Hopefully it goes right into construction, but the priority for me now is get through design, get it a really good hard design, put it on the shelf so we can use it sometime in the future. Hopefully the very next month.
Well,
But
yeah,
our priority should be getting design done, if we can find the money.
So get a design, put it on the shelf. Port Commissioner's already asked me, how long do we have to keep the bridge standing for? Right? There are things down the road that matter. People making business decisions in their community as to, gee, do I start this business when I may not have a way to get my materials across the river in 5 years, or in 8 years or 12 years, whatever. I think, just very broad strokes, looking at what the future may look like, and being able to color in a few of those paths, just a little. I think there's going to be a lot of value to that for letting the world know that we're not blind, and that we're not, delusional.
Yeah, I think a workshop would be helpful, because especially those scenarios of like, the, oversight of this governing body as the authority, but, how do we think on different off-ramp scenarios of what that dynamic is with the port? And as they're continuing to maintain a bridge, if that bridge is needed for longer. And I think, again, these are things where it's hard to see a negative to start having those conversations in this. We are a public agency. And I think it would be reassuring for the public, even if they're not present, but we have the record that, as Arthur said, our heads are not in the sand and we are taking seriously the responsibility of, if this project, what are those different delay scenarios and how do we react?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's that broad of an options, but.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be broad. I think it's just getting us all organized and focused on what are they?
Yeah.
Because, again, I think the way that this authority has been set up and the siphoning of focus, we are not on the same page. Depending on where you're sitting, your vantage point on the project, you're at a stage of drawing different conclusions. So it would be helpful to have the workshop so that if we're only in the funding space, or you're only in the construction, or you're only in the communications, we are now sharing the responsibility of the full picture and talking as a group, which is our, mandate, about what do we need to be thinking about, or what are we not asking you? I mean, I also feel like it's the responsibility to the team that we have. We need to be making sure we're in front of direction that we need to be given, or things that are going to be unrealistic or unfair to place upon staff because we are, caught with the floor pulled out from under us.
Well, I would suggest we give direction to staff to set up a workshop on that. Everybody
Trying to break down the silos between the committees. I mean, that's what you're.
And I think we ought to make it more than an hour, because it's going to take more than an hour.
I think that's like a 2 hour, just that.
Okay, we need to keep moving. We've got a decision to make. Who's going to DC in a couple of weeks?
So I think this is about the bylaws, which say we need approval for out-of-state travel. Is that right?
We do.
So I'll make a motion to authorize staff to book the travel necessary for 2 commissioners and 1 staff member to go to Washington, DC.
When are we going to know who's going to go?
Well, again, two commissioners are named. I just think that the requirement is the general approval. So if we want to have the names, I think what I'm calling out, well, I'll wait. It needs a motion, a second, before we have discussion about that motion.
What I'd like to do, more discussion.
Yeah.
I would like in that motion that we name, and I'm going to offer up Catherine and Jake, with Mike being on staff, to go back there. And Catherine is going to be back there anyway. I think we need to talk about, it's only fair to pay part of her ticket back there too. It's not totally on her company to do that.
Well, so for the amendment to identify who's traveling, Jake, Catherine, and Mike, I'll second that. I think there doesn't need to be discussion about paying. It should be expected. It's in our policies that we cover the cost for whomever we're sending as a delegation to Salem, Olympia, or DC. So I think it's more just we need the authorization for people when they travel out of state.
Correct.
And that's based on our home state of Oregon.
It's
Oregon or Washington.
Washington,
Idaho.
I think you included Idaho because
I think include Idaho.
That's first.
Okay.
So anything.
Okay, do we have a second?
We already had it.
Oh, okay, Arthur, thank you. All in favor? Aye.
Discussion.
I'm sorry.
Dan Mars included it in our packet. Is he not going or is he going?
So I made the motion for 1 staff and 2 commissioners because that's what's been discussed this whole point. I do have concerns. I think it's a little extraneous to send another staff when we're going to already have summit strategies, and the staff, I think that we need to fill the policy void, which will be the commissioners, as someone who can speak to the technical side of the project. We sent Dan and DC to the DC trip in the fall, and I think that was appropriate. He was onboarding and needed to understand dynamics, but it gives me concern if we're starting to send trips where there are more staff people than commissioners.
I agree with that. And in light of what we just talked about, lack of funding, I think we've got to keep it tight. And in my opinion, where Dan really helps us is with the elected officials. Well, we've got somebody there to help us with that. What I call the real meat and potatoes is the Department of Transportation discussions. That's all technical. And I don't see Dan's gonna bring a lot to that one. So I would agree on this particular trip, not having Dan go.
Clarify.
Okay?
Mhm.
Can we have a vote now? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Done.
Did we vote on, was that on the motion or on the second? Or did we just do both at the same time? I mean,
You
there were
seconded,
two-
right, Arthur?
No, I'm sorry. There was a
Oh.
motion, there was an amendment.
Oh,
right?
you're right. So we just, thank you. We just, voted on the amendment. So now we have a motion on the floor that names the traveling members as Catherine Thomas, Jake Anderson, Mike Shannon.
Right, so now we can all vote yes on this.
Okay.
Vote again.
Okay, so we have a motion, we have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay,
Thank you.
okay.
Sorry to be pushy about that, but I like the record to be clear.
Yeah.
Okay, informational items, the IGA Loan Reserve Fund Amendment Draft.
This is the idea between, what are we doing? IGA between us and the port.
All right, so this came up, I think, maybe the last two meetings, about and it really revolves around the need for the authority to have access to cash on hand to pay invoices.
Yep.
And for non-reimbursable expenses outside of what the grants will cover. And I'm gonna tie this into the ARPA date as well. So our ARPA funds, we have gotten I won't say everybody. There's been a concern for a while that ARPA could potentially get pulled back. And ARPA is port funding, not bridge authority funding, but it was port funding specifically for the bridge. So I just want to be clear as who owns the ARPA funds. That is still in the name of the port. There is concern that that money could get pulled back, and it's increasingly concerned. So that is what the authority was going to use as their cash in hand and have been using as their cash in hand to pay invoices. We need to spend the ARPA money as soon as possible. So, because we're concerned about it getting taken. So we are proposing that we work with Debbie, and we've got the ability to do this, to make some adjustments to spend this money as soon as possible, which puts the authority back in a position which we found ourselves over the holidays of not being able to pay our invoices within a 30-day invoice period. Even with the pay on invoice approach, it takes longer than that, up to 60 to 90 days to get reimbursed for payment. If you don't have cash on hand, then you run the concern of not being able to pay folks and having people not paid for 60 to 90 days. For subs, that could even be longer. So you could be talking 90 to 120 days. This adjustment to the IGA would allow you to have access to the reserve account, which would allow you to then make those payments on reimbursable expenses and to get that reimbursed back in. So you all need to have the discussion and decide if that's a path you would like to go. The port, I think, is in favor. Debbie or Kevin or somebody can tell me if that is wrong, or
they are.
Okay, and there was some question last time about why and if we wanted to do that, and so that's kind of the background of why you need to do it. So
let me put it into some different perspective here. This is only good through basically design, because our cost per month is a lot, but it's nothing compared to what it's going to be during construction, which means we're going to have to solve this problem before we get to construction. This is a temporary fix, and it'll get us through design, and we've got methods that will replenish this fund for this reserve as we get repaid, but it's not the long-term solution.
And there's two separate issues we're talking about. One is the loan funds availability, and the second is the ability to use our reserve toll fund with repayment when we get reimbursed.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
So it's a
So
cash.
the $500,000 increase to $1 million quote loan, that's only to be used for non-reimbursable type costs like lobbyists and so on that we can't recover through an amendment or through a grant.
Okay, so Grant and I were tasked with going to the port and having these discussions. We got the thumbs up on both of those issues from the port, and they're working on finishing up, drawing up the agreements and the changes.
That's what he was talking about reviewing.
Yeah,
earlier.
and that's what Judy's reviewing. So as long as I know not everybody was always present when we were tasked to go do that, and it sounded like there was some confusion at the last meeting. So if there's any questions, and I think most of those got. Arthur, do you have a question?
I just have a comment. So I was one of the people who was confused about this because I had had emergency back in New York, so I missed part of that discussion. I did have a discussion with Commissioner Shepard about this, and he shared the concern that Marla and I had expressed at the last meeting about what it looks like to the public if we're using these funds and part of what we're using them for is an ED. And I explained to him what we had discussed about wanting to see that I think Marla and I both expressed that we're not approving, we're not likely to approve of moving forward on ED until Grant shows us that it's cheaper to go down that path. If it's cheaper, then it's hard to understand why we would be against that. So I shared that with him. I just want you guys to know that I did have that discussion, and I have stated that in public meeting before. So I'm not shy about having that bouncing around.
So I think we can probably close down the conversation because we have staff working it up so that for both of those two topics, unless there's anyone against that. I think the other more important issue that we have is the one that came up on ARPA dollars and getting those spent. Because right now we thought we were going to have $10 million that we would have cash on hand or access to between ARPA and those and our reserve dollars. If we go back down to 5 million, we're back into the same bucket. Hopefully we can keep our payments much sooner than what we have with the Washington dollars, and we've worked our way through that system. But we still need to make sure that we have those dollars available. And I would ask that we task the finance committee with trying to come up with how do we get that $5 million back? The other thing is, in terms of an actual decision from the board, is do we need to start spending those ARPA dollars and actually claiming it rather than just using it as cash? My opinion is there is a huge amount of risk with those ARPA dollars, and that we need to start using that and show that we're using that. But again, by making that choice, we're reducing some risk, but we're adding risk on the opposite side, on the cash flow side. And so we want to make sure that this is the board's decision, that the board has this conversation in the open. And do we want to spend all those dollars right away, or do we want to spend a portion of them? And where do we put the risk versus reward on the rest of the board?
Can you tell me what the acronym ARPA stands for and who is the
American Rescue Plan Act.
And is that federal funding?
That is federal funding.
So I have been on conversations like that with Senator Cantwell's staff, and she and their staff made it very clear to us to be careful to spend federal funding that is just so we don't have to pay that money. So I just wanted to relay that to the
ARPA is like it is about COVID, and there was already a deadline for committing, and now all agencies are in a deadline towards expending. So that's the issue. I think why this is probably triggering for the port is it's the expending component. But I appreciate that. But these are dollars that I have not heard yet, and we certainly are, as the city of White Salmon and every county and agency, on these same timelines. That has not been flagged from any directive from any of these executive orders or federal.
And your expenditure deadline on ARPA is not until the end of next year. So
yeah, 2026.
But there's a risk of waiting that long.
And
right.
the
So
other
can
thing,
clarify what is the technical term that's being used here? Are they talking about deobligating these funds, or are they talking
That's a good
about
question.
not reimbursing
I think the right term would be clawback because they haven't been spent, like you're.
Reassign.
Yeah, because they've been money that's been appropriated but has not been spent or requested for reimbursement that you're seeing in other grant programs throughout the federal government where they are clawing back money literally out of people's bank accounts in some instances. And
But specific to ARPA, there was a deadline at the end of 24 where you had to have all funds obligated, and you have through 2026 to expend. So the obligation deadline has been passed. So I think it would be more a procedural move if there is a concern from the port that these funds aren't expended by 26. That's the trigger.
We'll expend them by 26. The concern was they may come next month because it looks like you have $4.5 million sitting in a unspent, that they will come back and say, oh, you're not spending that. You've had it since 2024. How about let's take those back?
Yeah, I mean, our city council reobligated some funds, so.
And the obligation on this happens, and Debbie can correct me, she was educating me on this. The obligation happened when ODOT gave the money to the port. So your full amount has been obligated. Obligation.
Or like a.
It's you haven't spent this.
Or a sub.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, in fairness to the port, I can definitely, and to ODOT.
Yes.
And so that's where a lot of that comes in, that fear of what could possibly happen. Again, these are the port's dollars. So I think, from our perspective, it's we make a recommendation to the port that this is what we want to spend it on. There's that marriage here that we're talking about. From my perspective, it's the possibility of losing $4.5 million is higher than my fears of the cash flow side.
So remind me,
let's hear from you.
ARPA's not a reimbursement grant. These are dollars that are sitting in the port's account right now.
Yeah, it's in the bank account.
It's in the bank account, but there is a reporting mechanism that you have to report on the funds. But yes, you're correct. It's sitting in Debbie's account.
Hey, Debbie, your input. You're on mute.
There's not.
You're on mute somehow.
Oh, this happened last time. We should have run to Kevin's office.
Got a problem with it.
Uh-oh. Okay.
Thumbs up. Do you think it's a good idea?
I think that's the gift.
Her recommendation is spend the money as soon as you can.
So what that entails is we've got one big invoice into Washington, and I'm looking at Debbie here, into Washington for payment, state of Washington for payment. We would pull that back and put that invoice against ARPA?
So Debbie and I talked this morning as well as we got the response from WashDOT this morning. They are proceeding to approve that package they've been holding on for more than a month.
Okay.
Which is $5 million.
Okay.
So I think it's too late to pull that back.
Okay.
And we had a plan to spend all those expenses that we spent for the rent and then all other expenses that was not accepted by WashDOT and move it to the ARPA.
Okay.
The next few months, all the invoices from Kiwit and HNTV and all other invoices from March, we go to the ARPA and we probably.
Okay, so the idea is the next series of invoices you'd throw into ARPA.
We'll prioritize spending ARPA.
And the other thing that we've been doing is things like our expenses on that we've been putting some things to the loan amount that we can actually expend through ARPA. And so we need to go back and redo those and get that through.
Yeah.
And then it'll give us more of a float on our $1 million loan.
Exactly. And we did have an exercise this morning with Debbie. So we have it all planned out. The other thing is the 5178 that has a deadline of June 30th to spend all $15 million. Now we are using ARPA instead of that. So we need to ask the extension of that biennium deadline to the next few months after July.
So who's got the action to do that?
So we already started talking with our WashDOT. We haven't heard back yet from that guy. But once we have a whole series, we wanna avoid the false impression that we may give to WashDOT. Hey, we don't really need the money now. So we want to make clear that, hey, we have this series and we will probably spend all this.
The key thing is we need the money,
right?
Not today.
Right.
Correct.
Right. So our action is we're going to tell them when we ask for extension, how much and when we're going to spend those pushed out funds.
So
Okay.
So the
Can we-
issue is, do we redirect our funding towards the ARPA dollars to make sure we don't lose them?
Right.
And then from that, there are a bunch of outfall tasks that happen to get the cash flow kind of reallocated to other sources. Correct. That's what we're trying to figure out.
So can we just do we all concur with that approach that we want to push and expend the ARPA as quick as we can?
I would agree. I just have my ARPA funding on my project zeroed out. So.
Yeah.
What?
Okay, let's just keep it on, please. Let's keep.
Yep. So can I go back to, because I'm afraid we delayed something and it may cause a problem. I just want to make sure we didn't do that. Going back to the ability to use the $5 million. What is the timing of the port needing to take that to their board? And do we have time to, or what were you looking for to make that decision? Because I didn't hear you take a motion or vote on the ability to use that.
Or is this the ARPA? 5 million?
This is the 5 million in reserves.
Oh.
So, because you're gonna need it to pay invoices within a couple months. You'll need it today, but you will need it to pay invoices within the next few months.
They have not seen that document.
They were in the packet.
It's in the packet. And the language
but it's
there is very clear about using those funds to pay invoices and then reimbursing that as soon as the bond money comes.
For the five, for the
Only for
5 million.
reimbursable expenses. That fixes Arthur's question about, paying something that's non-reimbursable.
The 5 million is for reimbursable only, so it has nothing.
And I think that addressed the issue that we talked about last meeting.
And again, both of those written agreements have been gone through our legal and they're fine with them. And I know it's worked through Port Legal, and I believe, Debbie, not if it's yes, at the next board, you want to be able to take that to the board and get final signature.
I think that's coming up in the next 18, pretty soon, before your next meeting, so.
So we'll sign it at our next meeting.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
So that one's closed out.
You
Right,
you didn't take a motion or anything.
Yeah,
on
so
it,
let's take
I
a-
think you needed, and I'm not the Robert's rules person.
we don't need a motion on something that's gonna come up for the board for signature.
It doesn't change our overall fund, the budget that it's just about how money's moving.
It's just about how money's moving. It doesn't change the amounts.
I think and then we don't need a motion on going to ARPA, but we would like consensus on that, spending the ARPA dollars first.
Can we have consent? Okay, we got consensus. Yes, everybody, yes. Any no's? We have consensus. When Debbie, well, I can't ask Debbie. When's your next port meeting? 18th?
They said, yeah. Your next meeting is the 24th.
Yeah, the 24th. So they're going to see it before you guys see it.
No, it was in the packet.
No, I mean, as far as approving it.
Yes,
Yes.
they'll
The
approve
board
it.
would approve it first.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, now to the easy one. The co-chair and commissioner vacancy for Mike Fox. In the package, I've submitted my resignation as of July 1st of this year. We've got some personal things going on and we'll be relocating out of the area, actually to the Tri-Cities. So I'm going to have to give up my chair and the commission spot. I can tell you I've worked 4 years on this thing. And my 100% goal is not politics. I just want to get us a bridge for our community. That's my 100% effort. And it's been a real joy these last 4 years. And it's too early to say goodbye yet, unless you guys are kicking me out. But it's been a really fun time, and it's kind of amazing what this team has done in 4 years when you really go back and look at it. Could we do more? Yeah, but it's pretty amazing what we got done. So at some point in time between now and then, I think we've got to get another full-time or full commissioner from the Oregon side. And then you guys are going to have to select a co-chair from the Oregon side prior to July 1st.
So you let Oregon know, the county.
I have communicated to the chair at the county, and I've made a recommendation to the chair. And now it's up to the county to decide, bringing on another person and elevating, I believe, one of our alternates to full commission.
So I
have a question.
apparently that did not get through to the county administrator. So I explained this to her last night, and I asked for that item, for an item to be put on our agenda. So our normal mechanism would be that if a seat is vacant, we wait until after the seat is vacant, and then we advertise the seat is vacant. We look for applications, and then we interview them, and then we choose a replacement. We're going to talk about at our meeting next Monday, I believe, is whether, given this structure of having this alternate and regular commissioner structure, whether we should act in different mode so that we don't have to have a period of time when this seat is vacant.
So Arthur, on your all's bylaws, and I think Kelly included it in the packet. It gives you guys in like what you're supposed to do as far as the bridge authority goes. So I think if I read them right, the first alternate would take that position until you appointed a new person. And then it doesn't change the appointing period of time, that you still would, at the end of Mike's normal term, have to reappoint or whatever you need to do at the end of his term. So you'll do it now, and then you'll do it again at the end of the year, I believe, when his actual term is over. The way I read it.
We have 3 alternates, any of whom can vote when we have if we only have 2 people from Oregon voting, any of the 3 alternates can vote. So that's not the issue. The issue is what formal process are we going to go through? And what the bylaws say is that is up to the county to do by the mechanism that the county does appointments. What I'm telling you is our mechanism is somewhat cumbersome. And I'm going to suggest that, given that we already have alternates, that we give preference to promoting an alternate and then replacing the alternate, rather than advertising for advertising for the vacancy and then allowing the alternates to apply for the vacancy, et cetera. I don't think we need to go through that cumbersome process. So we're going to talk about that on Monday.
I have some questions just for our operation as an agency. So at the start of the meeting, we said that on the Oregon side, we no longer have alternates assigned. So our bylaws right now, if I'm reading them correctly, are still under the old structure where there was an assigned alternate to each sitting director. It says until vacancy is filled, the alternate to the outgoing director shall serve as that director.
We changed, I thought we changed.
Did we change that part of our bylaws as well? I'm just going off the packet that was included for this meeting.
No, Oregon changed it. We may not have, that might have been one of the things in our bylaws that were updated.
Yep.
I'm reading one above. That's from the Hood River County Commissioners. So that's a different agency. That's what the county did to authorize people. So my next question is, our current chair terms are effective through when? Because we never did this on the schedule that was intended when we formed. So we're off cycle.
What do you mean by that?
Well, we didn't take a vote. We formed our authority, elected chairs, and we're supposed to elect chairs based on our bylaws at the first regular meeting of the year.
Which we did.
Which we did not.
No, we
the
did.
Actual action.
We did.
So it was in January of 24.
You elect them for 2 years, and then what happens is they switch on January.
But okay.
And then
confirmed that because my recall was So then we're filling the chair seat from July 25 through January of 20 through December of 25.
26.
Yeah, you will be filling the commissioner's seat, and then you will have to reappoint a new chair.
Correct. So my question specific on the chair, because it seemed like maybe there was a winnowing of even the available candidates on the Oregon side, just based on their appointments. But if it's expiring, I was assuming a July expiration because I, for some reason,
The
thought we
only,
did
the
not.
only thing that has to change is when Mike's replacement comes on, the rest of the board chooses who serves as chair out the rest of their term. If they then leave at the end of Mike's term in September, then we'd have to do it again for the next couple of months to finish out the year, and then it starts over in 26.
Yeah.
And
So there's two actions
another way
we
to
need
look
to
at that,
take.
The county chooses the commissioner, the board chooses.
Chooses the chair.
Yes, that's right. And Amy has a list of everybody's expiration. That's the wrong way to say that.
And in the
Everybody's end of terms.
in the packet, there is the river.
Yeah.
Release date.
The board.
Yeah, release dates.
And I just like to say one thing, and Mike kind of slipped up in how he was saying it because he said full time, but Mike really has been working full time. It's one of the benefits of having someone who's retired and dedicates his whole life to this. And one of those things that we can't, that we have taken for granted is the amount of time that he has put into this, and the amount of things and decisions that have at an executive level that had to be made that day that Mike has taken on for so many things. And I just want to say thank you for all the time that you put in, Mike. You've really helped us get to this point that we wouldn't be here without you.
And I would like to second and endorse everything that Commissioner Anderson said, and also to point out that Tri-Cities is home to the world's only remaining Spud Nut donut store. So
I know exactly where it is.
So there's a reason for all of us to go and visit Mike. So, but
it's about as close to healthy donut as you can get.
Oh, it's made with potatoes.
And it's
It has
not
to be
real
healthy.
close.
It was made with potatoes, must be healthy, but Mike, really, we would not at all, there's no chance we'd be where we are today without you, and we all owe you a debt of gratitude. The community does, we as commissioners do, so thank you so much.
Well, thanks for the kind words. I'm kind of disappointed that we couldn't get this thing in the water this year. I was really, really trying for that. But if we can get it into design before I get out of here, I'm okay with that.
We will invite you for the groundbreaking, as long as you bring some donuts with you.
Okay. All right.
And the other thing I would say is that, Mike, you've done such a great job with the committees and making sure that your committee members, you've taught me so much. And I'm sure they feel the same way, that you've just brought so much to the value to this project for everything you've done.
So how much did that cost?
Yeah.
$5?
$5. Dinner?
I appreciate it. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Okay, let's move on. We're going to drop or postpone communication policy. The committee discussion. So one of the questions that, one of the questions that some folks have had is, we've been in play now a year and a half or so. Should we take a look at the committees and the members of the committees, and do we need to move some folks around or do anything different with the committees? And to me, that's healthy to look at every once in a while and do just kind of a sanity check. So,
what were you guys just handed?
List of names of people on each committee and the times that they meet and dates.
Oh, okay, so we already know that. It's not a proposal or anything. Got it.
No, it's just the info.
Thanks.
So anybody have comments?
Well, so this is an informational item, so we're just discussing it and deciding what future action we may want to consider, or what additional information we want staff to look into.
Yeah.
For a future agenda item.
Could I suggest, given how late this meeting has gone, is this something that we could delay for time when we actually have brains?
Here, can you see it?
I would agree with Arthur. I think in the interest that it's 5 o'clock and this is not a pressing item, that we focus the discussion for what we want staff to do. And really that's about the commissioners. Do we want to move to have on a future agenda consideration of committee assignments, or is this simply just staying right now at a FYI to all the commissioners about the committees.
Go ahead.
The only thing I would add is we did just discuss how important it is to communicate with the public. And there's a vacant chair for the communications committee. And so there's no leadership from the commission to kind of lead that charge. So I would like to raise that up. I'm also the one that sort of has been driving this because I do feel that there is some siloing that is occurring, that the engineering and construction committee does know a lot that's going on. And obviously I'm not downplaying. I don't know what I don't know what you know and what you don't know. I just know we're involved in a lot of decisions. And so I was the one that sort of brought this up. And then hearing the very good discussion about what we want to tell the community, like we need to have someone leading that.
Well, I
So
think if I could interject, so I think this is a bit of a betrayal of process because and we can have the discussion. We should be having more in open forum. So I appreciate this because I think we're at a critical point where there are times where discussions here give the impression to the public that there are meetings happening where decisions are made before we get to the full public body. And that should never be the case in any committee. But on the communications committee specifically, that is absolutely correct that last month I said to my seatmates on that committee that I need to step down as chair because I feel that more time needs to be required to do that committee service. Our last committee meeting last week, we did not get to the conversation of who is stepping up as chair. So I think it's jumping one step ahead and violating the work in that committee. I would challenge back if a similar thing was happening within the construction or funding committee. I would venture to say that those people sitting on that committee would work within themselves to deliberate instead of that being moved to the full body, which in some ways feels a little bit of a betrayal of the process we all signed up for. This did not come from the communications committee. As I spoke today, I am still an active member on that committee, as are Nate and Jake. We did not bring this forward saying we're in need of a chair. So right now they're all fully seated. We have a balance where 3 commissioners are assigned across these committees.
I apologize I'm just noticing just based on the conversation we're having and the fact that we're tabling this, I'm just bringing that forward because I don't want there to be a misunderstanding that the people on this committee are now being charged to do something, but they may be switching the people on the committee and then there's this lack of who's leading. That's all I was saying. And if it was engineering construction, I would be saying the same thing. I'm just bringing forward.
There's no vacancy per se. There's 3 people assigned to the communications committee and we are actively working the same way that the construction committee rotates who gives us the report. I think on that committee, there would be a benefit to having a more equal share. And that's been what some of the discussion is, not to betray my seatmates on that committee, but within our committee. So I'm a bit surprised that what seems to be spurring this is what I would consider internal business on that committee, where between the 3, there needs to be a decision about chairs. That is separate, however, and I also agree, that should not be to me what triggers our occasional and hopefully consistent revisiting of who is assigned on committees. And I think, especially knowing that we have a chair vacancy, we will be stronger as a governing board if we have figured out some rotation where during the course of a term on this authority, you move among different committees. I think we are not well suited right now if people have an entire term where they've only stayed on one committee. I completely agree and support that does not strengthen the group. It puts us in silos and makes us not all have a different vantage point on the project.
If I may, to me, this sounds like this should be added to the workshop that we're going to have on other issues.
Yeah,
that's something that we do at the workshop level, and maybe we can finalize and think about that, because I think when we assign people to committees, and I believe the board as a whole chose the chairs according to the minutes. It wasn't internal within the committees. And so that's why, as a board of a whole, during the discussion and a workshop, I think we can do that. We can also look at the committees and whether, because I think what we did when we appointed people to committees, it was to people's strengths. And so always having you just moving from one committee to another in something you know nothing about may not be what's best for the organization.
I would interject, we are a public agency. There is not the requirement of a certain professional skill set to serve, and we should not want that if we are genuine about having this be representation of the public. So I think it's an unforeseen barrier we're potentially creating if there's an expectation that you have to enter into it with only professional experience in one of these 4 areas. That leaves a lot of people out.
With a lot of respect, That's your opinion. I have a different opinion. But I think this little workshop, maybe we can work that out.
And I think the reason that we have to have the people with experience is because we all on committees are not doing policy level stuff. We're doing executive level stuff because we have no staff. And that's what we've been doing for 2 years. And that's probably one of the reasons why we had to put people on the committees who have the experience. Otherwise, we'd be years behind.
Oh, you wouldn't be anywhere where we are today.
So,
One of the
Let's not debate
things-
that now.
Yeah, agreed. We should stay
Let's move
focused
this
on.
forward. This is a hard, I think they're good positions on both sides that I've heard today, but I'm mentally not prepared to make a decision.
well, we should send it to a workshop. Or is that a good enough decision, Arthur?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, have it
That's
on
what
a
I'm saying.
future agenda.
Okay, I would make an educated guess that the next item, we probably want to do the same thing, which is executive director discussion.
Yeah, I mean,
And I think it all ties together.
I thought we were waiting for Grant anyway. Grant doesn't have his numbers yet, does he?
Correct.
Yeah, we need a presentation on those numbers before we can have continued.
Can I don't, and maybe Grant, do you understand what numbers you're looking for? Because I don't.
Generally, yes, and
Okay.
some of, yeah, we talked.
We'll talk then.
Yep.
Yeah, because I'm not sure what numbers you're looking for.
Yeah,
Grant is
Oh,
really
got it.
good at this stuff.
Okay, so we're not ready to talk about that tonight.
right.
5 o'clock.
Okay. Yeah.
Table it.
And then the February additional toll revenue, Debbie can't talk, but the latest report's like 5.5 million.
5.5.
It's in the package.
Yep.
So it's going in the right direction. That's good.
Yes.
And ARPA update?
We did it already.
Yeah, we already did that. So you can see upcoming action items. Any, no presentations. We already had the one on contingency. Anything else anybody needs to bring up?
I would, oh, go ahead.
I would just say, this is a long meeting we've had, and these are the meetings that we need to be having. There is a lot of things and a lot of plates in the air all at the same time. And this is a great thing that we're buckling down and spending the time to work through these issues. And we are moving, we're changing stages from that infantile, brand new organization to, we're moving towards phase 1B. If we had the money, we'd already be in heavy design. Our plan was to be there in January, our original plan, and then it went to April. By slowing things down, I know it sucks, but we were also looking at the numbers where we were going to be, and we were going to be we went to get 2 other loans in order to make it through this process, this same slump that we're in. So where we're at today is kind of where we were going to be anyways, and we were planning for it. We just don't have to pay interest right now. And we can look at this as a difficult time, or we can look at this as a time for opportunity. We've got a lot of opportunity here to help try to drive the cost down on this project. So we're not at 1.2, that we can keep driving it down. And I know that it feels like there's a lot of stress on us right now, but to me, we've got 2 options moving forward for funding where a lot of projects you're seeing are getting pulled. And we've still got more options than most right now. And we've got a lot of really good support at our state partners and our federal partners. And we don't have the issues that other large projects are having. And the only thing I can say is we just need to keep working together as a team. And we need to have this workshop and try to break down the silos, because some people are having to put a lot of time in, and because that's where we're at as a project. And we just need to keep working together and stay positive towards one another. And
I'll second that. The quickest way to kill this thing is if we start infighting. We've got to be able to talk to each other, and we've got to be able to disagree with each other and still proceed forward. Otherwise, we're going to be just like the one down the river.
Yeah, I mean, I'll echo exactly that. A board that always agrees is doomed. It means we are not giving the proper space to minority perspectives. And this project, more than ever, it is on us. It's our responsibility to make sure that we are vetting and discussing and having good conversations. So I totally echo that. One thing I will flag, scanning the meeting minutes from our 2 January 2024 meetings, we did not take action on chair. So we should just be clear and find which meeting at the start of 2024 where we voted on chair, so that we either fix and get us back to January or we move that date. But if we're doing this exercise of needing to replace a seat, we should just do that housekeeping.
All right, we'll take a look. At it. I don't think there was a need for a vote because it was automatic.
It was automatic.
Flip.
on
I
the-
don't think there was.
It's in the bylaws the way it is. It says that the chairs flip.
No,
I
she's
don't
saying
think
it's
there was a
24.
requirement.
But again, okay, I would just love the time to look through, because having been on the bi-state working group that drafted the bylaws, there was definitely discussion around the first 6 months chair elections. And I remember that very animated discussion at our very first gathering of the group where we elected for 6 months. And there should be an action somewhere memorializing the shift out of those 6 months.
You did. And then that was what set the first 2 years, which.
But I'm
was
not
Jake
seeing that
first.
motion in those minutes.
Okay.
So.
Look at it. and see.
Yeah, and then the other thing I would just flag, and again, back to consistency in messaging, I as a commissioner would like that clock to stop or to change or take it down, but it is not accurate, and I just think it's.
I wanted them to change it to July 1st, 2025.
Me too.
Okay, with that, we are adjourned.